Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let me tell you a story.
The Manhattan skyline glowed behind the rooftop glass like the city was showing off for somebody important. Inside the restaurant, everything looked expensive. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished black tables. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers. Waiters moved carefully between wealthy guests, carrying champagne that probably cost more than most people's rent. Every few seconds, another camera flashed. Another laugh. Another business handshake. Another fake smile. Sophia tried not to look nervous as she adjusted the sleeve of her dark emerald dress for the third time in under a minute. Honestly, she had never spent that much money on clothing before. Her friends in Harlem practically forced her to buy it. "You better stop acting humble and let that man propose to you properly," one of them had joked earlier while helping her get ready. At the time, Sophia laughed so hard she nearly ruined her makeup. Now she sat beside Robert at one of the most exclusive rooftop restaurants in Manhattan, trying not to overthink why both families were suddenly present, why his investors were there, why the evening felt so carefully arranged. Robert looked perfect, as always. Tailored black suit, silver watch, calm expression. But something felt off. Sophia noticed it almost immediately. Robert barely touched his drink. His jaw tightened every time somebody mentioned the future. Even his smile looked delayed somehow, like he had to remind himself to react. That should have worried her sooner. Across the table, one of Robert's business partners raised his champagne glass with a grin. "To Robert," he announced loudly. "The only man in New York who treats billion-dollar negotiations like casual grocery shopping." The table laughed. Robert smiled politely. Another guest leaned toward Sophia. "You must be excited tonight." Sophia felt heat rise into her cheeks instantly. She tried playing it off. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, please," the woman laughed. "Nobody gathers both families at a rooftop restaurant for no reason." More laughter spread around the table. Sophia glanced toward Robert. He forced another smile, but he still looked uncomfortable. That tiny feeling in Sophia's stomach returned again, the one she had been trying to ignore all evening. A waiter refilled champagne glasses, while Manhattan lights shimmered through the rain beginning to fall outside the windows. Then somebody near the far end of the table finally asked the question everybody had clearly been waiting for. "So, Robert," the man smirked before taking a sip of champagne, "when's the wedding?" The room exploded with laughter. A few guests even clapped jokingly. Sophia laughed too at first, just a small nervous laugh. Then she looked at Robert and immediately stopped smiling, because Robert wasn't laughing. He froze, not dramatically, not obviously. But Sophia knew him well enough to notice. His fingers tightened slightly around the glass. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes dropped toward the table for half a second too long. The laughter around them slowly faded. Nobody spoke. Sophia suddenly became very aware of the silence. Her heartbeat felt loud now. Robert cleared his throat softly. "I'm not ready for marriage." The entire table changed. It happened instantly. The warmth disappeared from the room like somebody opened a window during winter. One woman awkwardly reached for her drink. Another guest looked down at his plate. Somebody forced out an uncomfortable laugh that died almost immediately. Sophia felt her chest tighten. At first, she honestly thought Robert was joking. But then she looked at him again and realized he wasn't. One investor sitting beside Robert chuckled awkwardly. "Smart man," he said. "Marriage can get expensive." A few people laughed politely. Sophia tried smiling. God, she really tried. But humiliation was already climbing into her throat. Robert rubbed his hands together slowly before speaking again. "My world is complicated," he said carefully. "Love alone isn't enough." Sophia stared at him. For a second, the entire rooftop disappeared emotionally. No music, no skyline, no luxury. Just those words sitting between them. Love alone isn't enough. She understood exactly what he meant. Not successful enough. Not refined enough. Not acceptable enough for the people sitting at that table. Sophia blinked quickly, trying to stop her eyes from watering. Nobody moved. Nobody helped her. Robert still couldn't even look directly at her. And honestly, that hurt worse than the words themselves. Sophia swallowed hard before speaking quietly. So after 3 years, her voice almost cracked, but she steadied it. I still don't fit into your world? Robert opened his mouth slightly, then stopped. No answer came. No defense. No reassurance. No courage. Just silence. And somehow that silence embarrassed her more than the rejection itself. Sophia looked around the table. People suddenly became fascinated with their drinks, their phones, their silverware. Nobody wanted to be part of the moment anymore, because everybody knew Robert had just broken her heart publicly. Sophia nodded slowly to herself like she was accepting something painful in real time. Then she stood carefully from her chair. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her purse. Robert watched her, but he didn't stop her. That became the moment Sophia finally understood something people rarely admit out loud. Sometimes the person who loves you can still be too weak to stand beside you when it matters most. Sophia barely remembered leaving the restaurant. One moment she was standing beside that table trying not to fall apart in front of strangers. The next, cold rain was hitting her face as she walked blindly through Manhattan streets, glowing with blurred yellow taxi lights. Her heels kept catching against the wet pavement. She almost twisted her ankle near the curb but didn't even stop walking. People passed her holding umbrellas, rushing through their own lives, barely noticing the woman trying not to cry in the middle of Fifth Avenue. Sophia pressed shaking fingers against her mouth. That was when the first tear finally escaped. Then another. And suddenly she couldn't stop them anymore. Mascara streaked down her cheeks while rain soaked the curls around her face. Her chest hurt from trying too hard to stay quiet. Her phone buzzed inside her purse again. Probably her friends. Probably asking if Robert proposed yet. Sophia couldn't answer, not without completely breaking down. She stopped briefly beside a dark storefront window and caught her reflection, accidentally. For a second, she just stared at herself. Elegant dress, wet makeup, destroyed expression. It almost felt unreal. 3 years. 3 entire years. And somehow, Robert still sat there silent, while people laughed at her like she was some embarrassing mistake he almost made. Sophia shut her eyes hard. Nope, she whispered shakily to herself. Don't do this here. But her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. A taxi splashed through rainwater nearby, slowing beside the curb after noticing her standing alone. The driver lowered the passenger window slightly. You getting in or auditioning for a Heartbreak music video? Sophia let out a surprised laugh through tears. It escaped before she could stop it. The driver pointed toward the back seat. Come on. It's freezing out here. Sophia climbed inside quietly, hugging her purse against herself while trying to catch her breath. The taxi smelled faintly like peppermint gum and old leather seats. Soft Dominican music played low through the speakers. The driver glanced at her carefully through the mirror. Man, trouble? Sophia looked out the rain-covered window. That obvious? You got the rich people heartbreak face? He replied. Very expensive sadness. Another small laugh escaped her, despite everything. Then silence filled the cab for a few seconds. Outside, Manhattan lights stretched across wet streets, while traffic crawled slowly through the rain. Sophia finally wiped under her eyes carefully. He said love wasn't enough. The driver made a face immediately. Oof. That single reaction almost made Sophia cry again. The driver shook his head slowly. Rich people always confuse money with wisdom. The words settled quietly inside the car. Sophia stared down at her trembling hands. And honestly, that should have been the moment she hated Robert. But she didn't. That was the worst part. Because underneath the humiliation, underneath the heartbreak, underneath the embarrassment, she still loved him. The cab stopped at a red light near Times Square. Neon reflections sliding across the windows. Sophia leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Then, the narrator speaks softly. 5 years earlier, Robert would have crossed New York barefoot just to make Sophia laugh. Emotional pause. So what happened? The rain continued falling outside while Manhattan kept moving like nothing important had happened at all. But somewhere inside another black car moving through the city, Robert sat alone, in complete silence. His untouched champagne still burned in the back of his throat, and for the first time in years, success felt small. This story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about what fear does to people when they care more about acceptance than loyalty. Because the truth is, most relationships don't collapse in one dramatic moment. Sometimes they break slowly, one silence at a time, one cowardly decision at a time, one moment where somebody should speak up and doesn't. And if you've ever loved somebody who made you feel safe, somebody who felt like peace during the hardest seasons of your life, go ahead and like this video. And if you believe pride destroys more relationships than poverty ever could, comment, "Real love takes courage." Because 5 years after Sophia walked away crying into those Manhattan streets, the same people who looked down on her would eventually stand up and applaud her. But before any of that happened, before the luxury galas, before the regret, before Robert realized money could not protect him from loneliness, there was Brooklyn. There was a charity event, and there was one accident involving sparkling water that changed both their lives completely. Welcome back to Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. Now, let's go back 3 years earlier, back before heartbreak turned into regret. Back when Robert still knew how to laugh without forcing it. And back when Sophia had no idea the quiet man in the expensive black suit watching her across that crowded ballroom would one day become both the greatest love and the deepest pain of her life. 3 years earlier, Brooklyn sounded different from Manhattan at night. Manhattan tried too hard to impress people. Brooklyn didn't care. Music leaked from open storefronts. Car horns interrupted conversations every few seconds. Food carts filled entire sidewalks with smoke and seasoning. Somebody argued loudly outside a corner store, while another person laughed hard enough to bend forward against a parked car. The neighborhood felt alive. Robert noticed that immediately when his driver pulled up outside the charity gala venue. He checked the building through the tinted window, with the same expression he used during investor meetings. Calm, unreadable, already mentally exhausted. The event was being hosted inside a renovated industrial art space near the waterfront. Large gold letters stretched across the entrance beside photographers and volunteers greeting arriving guests. Robert adjusted the cuff of his black suit while his phone buzzed again. Another message from his executive team. He ignored it. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Show up, smile, shake hands, mention the company's donation, leave early. That was the plan. Honestly, Robert almost skipped the event entirely. The past few months had been brutal. Meetings stacked on top of meetings. Investors demanding expansion. Endless pressure from people who treated human exhaustion like weakness. Even his apartment had started feeling temporary. Just another expensive place to sleep between obligations. The driver opened the car door. Cold Brooklyn air hit Robert immediately as camera flashes started nearby. "Mr. Hayes, over here!" Another photographer called his name. Robert gave the practiced corporate smile people expected from him and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the venue glowed with warm amber lighting hanging above hundreds of guests dressed in formal wear. Live jazz floated through the room, while waiters moved carefully between tables carrying trays of sparkling drinks. The event itself supported community youth programs across New York. Robert's company had sponsored nearly half of it, which meant tonight wasn't really optional. A volunteer approached him quickly. "Mr. Hayes, thank you so much for coming. We're really honored." "No problem," Robert answered politely, but his attention drifted almost immediately toward the far side of the ballroom. A woman hurried between tables carrying folders, speaking to staff members, checking decorations, fixing seating cards, and somehow answering 3 questions at once, without looking stressed. Well, maybe slightly stressed. She moved fast. Dark curls pulled back loosely. Simple black dress. Sneakers hidden underneath because apparently comfort mattered more than appearances tonight. Robert watched her point toward the stage while balancing two phones and a clipboard at the same time. One waiter nearly walked directly into her. She avoided him smoothly without even breaking conversation. "How are you still alive?" another staff member asked her while passing by. "Coffee and unresolved childhood issues," she answered immediately. The staff member laughed hard. So did Robert before he could stop himself. That surprised him more than it should have. The woman looked up briefly after hearing the sound. For half a second, her eyes met Robert's. Then she disappeared into the crowd again. Robert looked away first. A businessman beside him started discussing donation numbers almost immediately, but Robert barely focused on the conversation. Because somehow, the loud woman running around the ballroom felt more interesting than anybody important in the room. Across the venue, Sophia finally slowed down long enough to breathe. Barely. The gala had been chaos since noon. The florist arrived late. One sponsor changed seating arrangements twice. Somebody spilled wine near the silent auction display. And one musician almost refused to perform because the green room snacks were emotionally uninspiring. Sophia still didn't even know what that meant. She grabbed 2 sparkling waters from a passing tray while reviewing notes on her clipboard. "Table 12 needs another chair," somebody called out. "Already handled." The projector froze again. "Turn it off and threaten it." Technology responds to fear. A volunteer laughed while Sophia kept moving through the crowd. That was when she turned too quickly near the entrance and walked directly into Robert. Sparkling water splashed near his shoes instantly. Sophia froze. "Oh my God." Several nearby guests turned toward them immediately. Robert looked down slowly at the expensive leather shoes now covered with droplets. Sophia stared for half a second before speaking again. "Those shoes probably cost more than my rent, so I'm gonna apologize twice." Robert blinked, then laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite executive version. Not the controlled public version. An actual laugh that caught him off guard completely. Sophia looked relieved immediately. "Oh, thank God," she sighed dramatically. "You looked like the kind of man who sends invoices after emotional damage." Robert shook his head, still laughing quietly. "I'll survive." "You sure?" Sophia crouched, slightly inspecting the shoes. They looked emotionally expensive. Robert noticed something instantly. She wasn't nervous around him. Most people became awkward within seconds after learning who he was. Sophia didn't seem impressed at all. Embarrassed? Yes. But intimidated? Not even slightly. She stood upright again and offered her hand casually. "Sophia." "Robert, I know," she replied. "Your face is on at least 3 giant signs outside." That made him laugh again. Sophia pointed toward one banner near the entrance. "You're technically larger than the actual charity event tonight." Robert followed her gaze toward the massive sponsorship display carrying his company logo beside his own professional photo. Honestly, she wasn't wrong. "That bad?" he asked. Sophia tilted her head. "You want the honest answer? Or the rich person answer?" Robert folded his arms slightly. "There's a difference? Huge difference." Sophia leaned closer confidentially. "The rich person answer is, your company's generosity is inspiring and transformative." Robert tried not to smile. "And the honest answer? You look like a man being held hostage by networking." Robert laughed again before lowering his head briefly. That one landed too accurately. Sophia noticed the reaction immediately. "Oh wow," she said softly. "I was joking. But now I'm concerned." "I'm fine." The way she said it made it obvious she didn't believe him. A volunteer rushed toward Sophia suddenly. "We need you near the stage." Sophia closed her eyes briefly. "Of course we do." Then she pointed 2 fingers toward Robert before backing away. "Try smiling at least once tonight. You look emotionally audited." And just like that, she disappeared into the crowd again. Robert watched her go longer than necessary. A businessman beside him started speaking again about financial projections, but Robert barely heard a word. Because across the ballroom, Sophia was laughing with staff members, while fixing problems nobody else even noticed. And somehow, She looked more alive than anybody there. The night continued around them. Speeches, donations, music. But Robert kept noticing Sophia, not in some dramatic love-at-first-sight way. It was smaller than that, more human. He noticed how she thanked waiters by name, how she fixed decorations herself. Instead of ordering people around, how she made nervous volunteers laugh, how the entire event seemed calmer whenever she entered a space at one point. An older guest became frustrated over seating arrangements. Before staff could panic, Sophia stepped in smoothly. "You're absolutely right," she told the man seriously. Robert watched nearby, expecting conflict. Then Sophia continued. "Honestly, if somebody sat me near my ex-husband, I'd probably sue everybody involved." The older man burst out laughing. Tension disappeared instantly. Robert shook his head quietly to himself. She was good. Very good. Later that evening, Robert stepped away from another exhausting business conversation and moved toward the balcony, overlooking Brooklyn lights stretching beside the water. Finally, silence. Well, almost silence. "You escaped too?" Robert turned. Sophia stood near the balcony doorway, holding 2 small dessert plates. "I was hiding," Robert admitted. "I knew it." Sophia handed him 1 plate. "Peace offering for almost murdering your shoes earlier." Robert looked down. "Cheesecake? Life's too short for dry charity chicken." That earned another laugh from him. They leaned quietly against the railing, overlooking the city. For the first time all evening, Robert felt his shoulders relax slightly. Sophia noticed immediately. "There," she said softly. "What?" "You just exhaled like a normal human being." Robert looked down at the cheesecake plate. "You analyze everybody this much?" "Only people who look exhausted." The city lights reflected softly across the water below them, while music drifted faintly from inside the venue. Sophia ate another bite before glancing sideways at him. "So what's your story?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "You don't know?" "I know Google exists," she replied. "I meant your actual story." That question caught him off guard more than he expected. Most people asked about money, business, influence, success. Sophia asked like none of that mattered. Robert stayed quiet briefly before answering. "Work mostly." Sophia winced jokingly. "Oh no." "What?" "You answered like a LinkedIn profile." Robert laughed under his breath again. "That bad?" "Robert, if your autobiography sounds like a tax seminar, we need to save you immediately." He shook his head, smiling despite himself. Sophia leaned against the railing. "Okay. Let me guess. This should be interesting." "You work too much." "True." "You sleep badly." Robert glanced sideways at her. "Also true." "You're probably one of those rich people who says things like, 'I forgot to eat today.'" Robert looked genuinely offended. "I ate." "When?" He paused. Sophia pointed at him dramatically. "Oh my God." Robert laughed harder than he had in weeks. Not because the jokes were perfect. Because talking to her felt easy. No performance. No pressure. No pretending. Just conversation. Natural conversation. Sophia looked at him carefully for a moment after the laughter settled. "There it is again." "What?" "That sad rich man look." Robert smiled faintly. "I have a sad rich man look?" "A little?" "That's concerning." "You'll survive." Their eye contact lasted slightly longer this time. Not awkward. Just noticeable. Sophia looked away first. Inside the ballroom, applause suddenly erupted after another speech ended. Sophia sighed dramatically. "Duty calls." She started moving toward the door before Robert spoke unexpectedly. "Wait." She turned back. Robert studied her for a second before asking, "Do you always talk to rich strangers like that?" Sophia smiled slowly. "Only the ones who look emotionally exhausted." Robert told himself he was not going back to Brooklyn for Sophia. That lie lasted exactly 4 days. By Friday evening, he was sitting inside his black SUV staring through the window at a small Harlem restaurant Sophia recommended over text, with the confidence of somebody emotionally unafraid of food poisoning. Her exact message said, Stop eating meals prepared by people named Sebastian who use tweezers on mashed potatoes. Meet me at 8. Robert reread the text twice before smiling to himself, which honestly annoyed him a little. The restaurant looked nothing like the places his business partners usually dragged him into. No giant chandeliers, no piano music, no people pretending sparkling water had flavor complexity. Just bright lights, loud conversations, music playing somewhere in the back, and the smell of grilled onions hitting the sidewalk before Robert even entered. Sophia spotted him immediately through the front window and started laughing. Robert frowned slightly while walking inside. "What?" Sophia pointed directly at him. "You wore a cashmere coat to buy chopped cheese in Harlem. I didn't know there was a dress code." "There is," she replied. "And you're dressed like a wealthy substitute teacher." A man near the counter overheard and laughed loudly. Robert looked around the restaurant. "You invited me here just to bully me publicly?" "Absolutely." Sophia slid a wrapped sandwich toward him across the small table. "Eat." Robert carefully unwrapped it, while Sophia watched with visible entertainment. "You look nervous." "I'm assessing. You're holding a sandwich like it requires legal approval." Robert ignored that. One bite later, he paused completely. Sophia leaned forward immediately. "There it is." Robert looked at her. "What?" "That little moment rich people have when seasoned food changes their personality." Robert shook his head, laughing quietly. "This is actually good." Sophia gasped dramatically. "Actually good?" She pressed a hand against her chest. "Harlem forgives you." Robert laughed again. That kept happening around her. Too easily. And honestly, that was becoming dangerous, because Robert had spent years building control into every part of his life. Control over emotions. Control over schedules. Control over public image. Then Sophia walked into his life talking nonsense about emotionally exhausted sandwiches. And suddenly he looked forward to things again. Outside, Harlem moved loudly through the night, while Sophia continued teasing him between bites of food. "You definitely grew up eating unseasoned chicken." "I did not." "You hesitated." "That hesitation tells me everything." Robert leaned back, smiling. "You judge people aggressively." "No," Sophia corrected. "I observe." "Dangerous difference. You have no idea." Her smile softened slightly after saying it. Then she looked out the window briefly. "You know what's weird?" "What?" "You don't act like other rich men." Robert raised an eyebrow. "That sounds insulting somehow." "It's not." Sophia shrugged lightly. "Most wealthy guys spend entire conversations trying to prove something. And I don't." "You mostly look tired." Robert laughed under his breath. "That's probably worse." "No," Sophia replied quietly. "It's more honest." That answer stayed with him longer than he expected. A week later, Robert found himself riding the subway with Sophia at nearly midnight after one of his investor meetings downtown. His driver had offered to pick them up. Sophia refused immediately. "Absolutely not." Robert looked confused. "It's raining." "Exactly. Subway weather. That's not a real thing." "It is in New York." The train rattled loudly beneath the city, while exhausted commuters leaned against poles half asleep. Sophia sat beside Robert holding a paper bag filled with cookies from a bakery she loved. Robert loosened his tie slightly. "For the record," he muttered, "this is significantly less comfortable than my car." Sophia nodded seriously. "Builds character." "I already have character." "No," she corrected while handing him a cookie. "You have expensive watches." Robert smiled despite himself. A musician entered the train car playing old R&B softly through a small speaker. Sophia immediately started swaying slightly to the music. Robert noticed. "You know every song ever made?" "Only the important ones." "You say that about everything." "Because I'm usually right." The musician transitioned into an older love song. Sophia pointed toward him suddenly. "Dance." Robert stared at her. "Absolutely not." "Coward." "There are at least 40 people watching." "Exactly. Free audience." Robert shook his head laughing while Sophia stood anyway, dancing badly in the tiny subway space just enough to embarrass him publicly. Several passengers started smiling. One older woman near the door clapped along quietly. Sophia pointed at Robert again. Your turn. I'm a CEO, and we don't dance on trains. Sophia sat back down dramatically. See? Emotionally oppressed. Robert finally laughed hard enough to lower his head briefly. The older woman across from them smiled. She's good for you, she announced casually. Sophia looked proud instantly. Robert looked away toward the subway window. But he was smiling. That scared him more than it should have, because somewhere between Brooklyn and Harlem, Sophia had started becoming part of the safest moments of his week. A month later, Robert sat inside Sophia's apartment kitchen watching her aggressively season chicken, while old R&B played from a speaker near the sink. Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. Sophia pointed the seasoning container toward him accusingly. You see this? Robert looked up from his drink. I'm concerned already. This is flavor. I know what seasoning is. Sophia continued cooking dramatically. Wealthy people are terrified of spices. That feels targeted. It is targeted. Robert shook his head, smiling. Sophia danced slightly while stirring something on the stove. Her apartment smelled warm. Garlic, butter, music. Home. Robert noticed something strange every time he visited her place. He relaxed without trying. At his penthouse apartment, silence always felt expensive. Here, silence felt peaceful. Huge difference. Sophia glanced over her shoulder suddenly. You're staring again. I'm thinking. Dangerous hobby. Robert smiled faintly. You always talk this much? Only when people are lucky. Their eyes met briefly before Sophia turned back toward the stove, smiling to herself. Later that night, they danced slowly in the kitchen, while dishes still sat, drying beside the sink. No audience. No expensive event. No pressure. Just old music and tired laughter. Sophia rested her chin lightly against Robert's shoulder. You know something? What? You're less boring than I expected. Robert looked offended. You had low expectations. You wore a three-piece suit to a charity gala. Fair point. Sophia laughed softly against his shoulder. Robert closed his eyes briefly, and for the first time in years, his mind finally felt quiet. Another evening, Robert sat on Sophia's couch while she braided her hair in front of a small mirror near the television. The apartment lights were dim, except for the soft glow from the kitchen. Sophia spoke casually while separating sections carefully between her fingers. My grandmother used to braid my hair way too tight when I was little. Robert looked up from his phone slightly. You hated it? I acted like I hated it. Sophia smiled softly at the memory. But honestly, I just liked sitting there listening to her talk. Robert watched her quietly. Sophia noticed, after a second. What? Nothing. You've been staring at me for like 2 minutes. Robert shrugged lightly. You make ordinary things look peaceful. Sophia paused briefly at that answer. Not dramatic, just enough to feel it. Then, she looked away, smiling faintly. That's probably the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. Robert meant it too, because everything around Sophia felt human in a way his life had stopped feeling years ago. With her, meals lasted longer, conversations mattered, silence felt comfortable, laughter happened naturally. Sophia's friends noticed immediately. One night during a small cookout in Harlem, Robert stood awkwardly near the grill, while Sophia disappeared inside to grab drinks. A friend beside him smirked knowingly. So you rich? Robert nearly choked on his drink. I'm doing okay. That means yes. Another voice called from nearby. Sophia got herself a Wall Street husband. Robert rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Sophia returned just in time to hear it. Leave him alone. She laughed. He still thinks paprika is adventurous. Everybody burst out laughing. Robert pointed toward her immediately. You promised not to tell people that. I promised nothing. Sophia handed him a plate while still laughing. The warmth around her felt contagious. And Robert realized something quietly that night, while watching Sophia argue with friends over music choices beside the grill. He hadn't checked his work phone in almost 3 hours. That had never happened before. Much later, after the cookout ended, Robert and Sophia sat together on a rooftop overlooking Manhattan lights in the distance. The city hummed softly beneath them. Sophia leaned back against the wall beside him. "You're thinking again." Robert exhaled slowly. "I forgot what this felt like." "What?" "Peace." Sophia looked at him carefully after that. Not joking this time. Just quietly understanding him. Robert stared out toward the skyline. "With you, everything slows down." Sophia smiled softly, but didn't answer immediately. Some moments didn't need extra words. Old R&B drifted faintly upward from an apartment window somewhere below them. Sophia rested her head carefully against Robert's shoulder. Neither of them spoke for a while. And honestly, that silence felt better than most conversations he had endured in years. Eventually, Sophia fell asleep beside him while the music continued floating through the night air. Robert looked down at her resting peacefully against him, then toward the city again. And for the first time, in a very long time, he didn't feel lonely inside his own life. The narrator speaks softly. Neither of them realized peace can become addictive. For a while, Robert honestly believed love would be enough. That was the dangerous part. Because happiness can make people ignore warning signs they normally would never miss. At first, the judgment surrounding Sophia arrived quietly, small enough to dismiss, small enough to pretend it meant nothing. Robert noticed the first moment during a private dinner in Manhattan with several executives from his company. Sophia sat beside him, wearing a simple black dress and silver earrings she almost didn't buy because she claimed they looked too rich for her personality. Robert told her she looked beautiful anyway, and she did. More than beautiful, honestly. Comfortable. That was rare in those rooms. Most people at elite dinners looked like they were performing wealth instead of enjoying themselves. Sophia looked like herself. That alone made her stand out immediately. One executive's wife smiled tightly across the table. "So, Sophia," she said while sipping wine carefully, "what exactly do you do?" Sophia answered politely, "I coordinate nonprofit events and community fundraising projects." The woman nodded slowly. "Oh, that sounds meaningful." Sophia smiled. The kind of smile people use when they already understand the insult hidden underneath the sentence. Robert noticed it immediately. But before he could redirect the conversation, another guest interrupted. "You must love Robert's lifestyle," the man joked casually. "That kind of success changes everything." Sophia laughed lightly. "Honestly, Robert still gets nervous ordering food from bodegas." A few people laughed. Tension softened briefly. Sophia had become good at that, turning awkwardness into humor before it fully landed. But Robert still noticed the quick looks people exchanged afterward, the subtle judgment, the silent calculations, and somehow that bothered him more than he expected. Later that evening, while guests moved toward another dining area, Sophia quietly reached for Robert's hand beneath the table. "You okay?" she asked softly. Robert looked at her. "Why would you ask that? You went emotionally silent 20 minutes ago." Robert exhaled lightly. "It's nothing." Sophia studied him carefully for a second. Then she squeezed his hand once and let it go. That should have been the moment Robert started protecting her more openly. Instead, he convinced himself the comments weren't serious enough yet. A month later, Sophia attended another event with Robert inside a luxury midtown hotel ballroom filled with investors, old money families, and media personalities pretending not to gossip about each other. The room looked perfect. Nobody inside it felt relaxed. Sophia stood near Robert, while waiters passed trays of champagne through clusters of wealthy guests, discussing market trends like they were debating weather. One woman approached Robert immediately. Tall, elegant, practiced smile. She greeted Robert warmly before finally acknowledging Sophia. "And you are?" Sophia extended her hand politely. "Sophia." The woman shook it briefly, then immediately turned back toward Robert. Sophia lowered her hand slowly. Robert noticed. His jaw tightened slightly. Still, he said nothing. The conversation continued around Sophia instead of including her. Stock markets, private schools, vacation properties, family names. At one point, another guest handed Sophia an empty champagne glass without even looking at her properly. "Could you take this, sweetheart?" Sophia blinked once in surprise, then smiled politely. "I could," she replied calmly. "But I don't work here." The woman's face changed instantly. "Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry." Sophia handed the glass back gently. "No problem. Happens all the time when rich people see black women holding confidence." Robert nearly choked, trying not to laugh. Several nearby guests became visibly uncomfortable. Sophia smiled pleasantly the entire time. But later that night inside the car home, she stared quietly out the window longer than usual. Robert noticed. "You handled that well." Sophia gave a soft laugh without looking at him. "That's a nice way of saying your rich friends embarrassed me." Robert rubbed his thumb slowly against his palm. "They weren't trying to." Sophia finally turned toward him. "That's what worries me." Silence settled between them. Outside, Manhattan lights moved across the car windows, while Robert searched for the right thing to say, but nothing came out correctly. Sophia looked away again. That moment stayed with her longer than she admitted. Over time, the comments became harder to ignore. Not openly cruel, almost worse than that. Polite disrespect. Questions wrapped inside fake curiosity. At another gathering, one older businessman asked Sophia where she attended school. When she answered honestly, he nodded slowly before saying, "Ah, Robert usually surrounds himself with Ivy League people." Sophia smiled lightly. "Well, somebody has to bring personality into the group." Several people laughed, even the businessman. But Robert noticed Sophia drinking more water than usual afterward. A small habit she had whenever something upset her. And still, he failed to confront anyone directly. Not because he agreed with them, because he hated conflict in those rooms. That weakness slowly became dangerous. One evening, Robert brought Sophia to a private dinner hosted by his mother, inside an enormous Upper East Side townhouse that looked more like a museum than a home. Sophia stood near the entrance, whispering to Robert while removing her coat. "If one more rich person offers me sparkling water with cucumber inside it, I'm leaving." Robert smiled faintly. "You'll survive. That's what people say before horror movies start." Robert laughed quietly. His mother approached moments later. Elegant posture, controlled smile, perfect pearls around her neck. She kissed Robert on the cheek first, before finally looking toward Sophia. "Sophia," she greeted politely. "Mrs. Hayes, you look lovely tonight." "Thank you." Everything sounded respectful, but Sophia immediately felt the emotional distance underneath the politeness. Dinner itself became exhausting quickly. Robert's mother asked careful questions about Sophia's work, family, upbringing, and future plans with the precision of somebody conducting an interview she already disliked. Sophia answered calmly the entire time, sometimes even playfully. At one point, Robert's mother asked, "So how are you adjusting to Robert's world?" Sophia smiled while cutting into her food carefully. "I didn't realize it required emotional onboarding." Robert almost laughed into his drink. His mother didn't. The rest of the table became awkwardly quiet for a second. Sophia noticed immediately, then softened the moment herself. "I'm joking," she said gently, but Robert saw it. That tiny flicker in her eyes afterward, the one she got whenever she felt unwanted somewhere. Much later, after dinner ended, Robert found Sophia standing alone near the townhouse balcony overlooking the city. Cold wind moved softly through her curls. "You disappeared," he said quietly. Sophia shrugged lightly. "Needed air." Robert stepped beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sophia finally asked, "Do they always look at me like that?" Robert hesitated. Tiny mistake. But Sophia caught it immediately. "That's enough of an answer. It's complicated." Sophia laughed softly to herself. "That phrase rich people use when they don't want to admit something ugly?" Robert leaned against the railing beside her. "My mother just takes time with people." "No," Sophia replied calmly. "Your mother already decided who she thinks belongs beside you." Robert looked down briefly, because deep down, he knew she was right. Sophia folded her arms against the cold. "You know the crazy part? What? I actually tried tonight. Robert frowned slightly. What do you mean? I watched videos about wine before coming here. That surprised a laugh out of him. Sophia shook her head, smiling faintly. I'm serious. I didn't want anybody thinking I wasn't good enough to be in those rooms. Robert's smile faded slowly, because hearing her say that hurt more than he expected. Sophia looked toward the skyline again. But honestly, half those people looked miserable. Robert stared at her quietly. You still made the room better. Sophia smiled softly at that, but the sadness underneath it remained. And little by little, those moments started collecting inside Robert's mind. The awkward silences, the fake smiles, the judgment, the pressure. One night after another corporate charity event, Robert stood alone near the bar, while several investors discussed branding opportunities nearby. Sophia had stepped away to take a phone call. One older investor leaned closer toward Robert. She's beautiful, the man admitted casually. Robert nodded once. She is. The investor swirled his drink slowly. But perception matters at your level. Robert's expression barely changed. Still, something inside him tightened immediately. The investor continued carefully. People pay attention to who stands beside powerful men. Robert looked toward Sophia across the ballroom. She was laughing loudly at something near the entrance, completely unaware of the conversation happening about her. Warm, alive, real. The exact opposite of everybody else in the room. Robert stayed quiet. And unfortunately, that silence became the beginning of something far more damaging than either of them realized. At first, Sophia thought Robert was just tired. That explanation felt reasonable. He worked constantly, managed thousands of employees, answered calls at impossible hours, flew between meetings like rest was some optional activity wealthy people ignored for sport. So when he started checking emails during dinner more often, Sophia tried not to take it personally. When he canceled 2 date nights in 1 month, she told herself it was temporary. And when he started staring at his phone during conversations like part of his mind existed somewhere else entirely, she still reached for his hand anyway. Because love makes people patient long after worry begins. One Thursday evening, Sophia sat cross-legged on Robert's couch inside his Manhattan penthouse, while waiting for him to finish another late-night conference call. Rain tapped softly against the massive windows overlooking the city. An old movie played quietly in the background. Sophia checked the time again. 11:17 p.m. Robert stood near the kitchen, speaking into his headset, with the cold, controlled voice he only used during business calls. No, he said firmly. Delay the announcement until legal reviews the merger numbers again. Pause. I don't care what the media is speculating. Another pause. Then manage the speculation. Sophia looked toward him from the couch. Even from across the room, tension sat all over him. His shoulders stayed tight constantly now. His jaw clenched more often. And lately, he barely laughed anymore. Not the real kind. Not the easy kind she fell in love with. Robert finally ended the call nearly 15 minutes later and removed the headset slowly. Sophia muted the television. You okay? Robert rubbed both hands over his face briefly before answering. Long day. That's becoming your entire personality. He gave a tired smile. Probably. Sophia waited for him to walk toward her. Usually he would. Usually he'd collapse beside her dramatically and complain about investors ruining his will to live. Tonight he stayed standing near the kitchen. That tiny distance bothered her more than it should have. Sophia patted the couch cushion beside her. I saved you popcorn. Robert glanced toward the bowl, then toward his laptop sitting open on the counter. I still need to review something. Sophia tried joking first. Robert, if you marry your company, I hope the honeymoon is stressful. Normally, that would make him laugh immediately. Tonight, he barely smiled. I won't be long. Sophia nodded slowly, but something inside her sank quietly anyway. That moment stayed with her the entire night. Not because of what Robert said, because of what he didn't notice. He didn't notice she fell asleep waiting for him on the couch. Didn't notice the untouched popcorn beside her. Didn't notice she woke briefly around 2 a.m., and saw him still working under dim kitchen lights instead of beside her. And honestly, that hurt more than any argument could have. Over the next few months, pressure started following Robert everywhere. Business magazines began covering his merger constantly. Financial blogs analyzed every public appearance, every investor meeting, every personal detail. One morning, Sophia nearly spit out her coffee while scrolling online. Why are rich people so obsessed with pretending everybody's secretly engaged? She muttered. Robert looked up from his tablet. What now? Sophia turned her phone toward him. A gossip headline showed, CEO Robert Hayes preparing surprise proposal. Robert immediately looked irritated. Ridiculous. Sophia studied him carefully. Most people would laugh at a headline like that. Robert looked tense instead. You don't think it's funny? It's invasive. That's not what I asked. Robert set his tablet down harder than intended. Sophia. No, seriously. She folded her arms lightly. You used to laugh at stuff like this. Robert exhaled slowly. I'm dealing with a lot right now. Sophia looked down at her coffee briefly. I know. And she did know. That was the problem. She understood him enough to keep excusing things that were slowly changing between them. A week later, Robert attended a private investor dinner without Sophia for the first time in months. Not because she wasn't invited. Because Robert suggested she skip this one. That sentence bothered Sophia immediately. She stood inside his bedroom, helping him adjust his tie before the event. Why exactly should I skip this one? Robert avoided eye contact while buttoning his cuff. It's just business. You've taken me to business dinners before. This one's different. Sophia tilted her head slightly. How? Robert paused too long. Tiny mistake. Sophia noticed instantly. Robert, he sighed quietly. Some of the investors are older. Traditional. I just don't want unnecessary tension tonight. Sophia stared at him. There it was. Not directly cruel. Not fully honest either. Just careful enough to wound slowly. Sophia stepped backward slightly. So now I'm tension? That's not what I meant. Then explain it better. Robert ran a hand across his face. You know how these people are. Sophia laughed once softly. Not happy laughter, more disbelief. Wow, that's not fair. No, she replied quietly. What's not fair is realizing your boyfriend thinks I'm bad for business. Robert finally looked at her directly. I never said that. You didn't have to. The room felt different after that conversation. Smaller somehow. Robert reached toward her gently. Sophia stepped away first, and honestly, that hurt him immediately. But instead of fixing the moment properly, he grabbed his suit jacket and left for the dinner anyway. Sophia stood alone in the apartment after the door closed, then looked toward the skyline outside the windows. For the first time since meeting Robert, she wondered whether love could slowly disappear without either person fully realizing it. Meanwhile, pressure around Robert kept tightening. At corporate meetings, executives started speaking more openly around him, not directly criticizing Sophia, just carefully suggesting things. One executive casually mentioned, public image matters more during mergers. Another joked, you'll become New York's favorite billionaire bachelor if you stay unmarried. Robert usually ignored the comments publicly, but privately, they stayed in his head longer than he admitted, especially after his mother started calling more often. One afternoon, Robert met her for lunch inside an upscale restaurant near Central Park. His mother sipped sparkling water delicately before speaking. You've been avoiding this conversation. Robert already looked exhausted. I know exactly where this is going. Then, perhaps listen carefully. Robert leaned back silently. His mother folded her napkin calmly. You are entering the most important phase of your professional life. Here we go. And perception matters. Robert looked away briefly toward the restaurant windows. He hated hearing that word now. Perception. Everybody kept saying it like emotional compromise was maturity. His mother continued carefully. There are women in your social circle who understand the responsibilities attached to your life. Robert gave a dry laugh. You mean wealthy women? I mean compatible women. Robert rubbed his jaw slowly. Sophia makes me happy. His mother softened slightly after hearing that. I'm sure she does. That answer somehow felt worse than direct criticism, because it sounded dismissive. Like happiness itself was childish. Robert stayed quiet the rest of lunch, and unfortunately, silence kept becoming his favorite way to avoid difficult truths. Sophia noticed the emotional distance growing more each week. Not dramatically, in small painful ways. Robert stopped reaching for her first, stopped staying overnight as often, stopped laughing during small moments. Even their subway rides changed. One evening, Sophia sat beside him while the train rattled downtown beneath the city. Robert checked emails almost the entire ride. Sophia watched him quietly before finally speaking. You know what I miss? Robert looked up distracted. What? You. That answer landed harder than she intended. Robert lowered the phone slowly. I'm right here. No, Sophia replied softly. Your body is... The subway kept moving loudly around them. A teenager danced through the train car, asking for tips, while music played from a portable speaker nearby. Months ago, Sophia would have forced Robert to dance badly with her just to embarrass him. Tonight, neither of them even smiled. Sophia looked toward the subway window instead. That scared Robert more than arguing would have, because Sophia only became quiet when something genuinely hurt her. A few nights later, Robert arrived at Sophia's apartment, carrying flowers and takeout from her favorite restaurant. An apology attempt. Sophia opened the door wearing oversized pajamas and looked genuinely surprised. You remembered food exists? Robert gave a tired smile. I deserved that. Yes, she replied calmly while taking the flowers. Inside the apartment, tension still lingered slightly between them. But Sophia tried. She always tried. During dinner, she told him funny stories about a disastrous fundraiser meeting involving a live goat and an emotionally unstable DJ. Normally, Robert would laugh hard at stories like that. Tonight, he mostly listened quietly. Sophia noticed again, and finally asked the question sitting inside her for weeks. Are you still happy with me? Robert looked stunned immediately. What kind of question is that? The honest kind. Robert stared at her across the table. Because the terrible part was, he still loved her deeply. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, fear had started entering places love used to fill completely, and Robert still hadn't admitted that to himself yet. A few days later, Sophia received a text from Robert. Friday, rooftop dinner. Dress nice. Sophia stared at the message for nearly 30 seconds, then covered her mouth slowly. Her heart immediately started racing, because after everything, after the distance, after the tension, her mind went to one place instantly. This is it. He's finally proposing. Sophia read Robert's text at least 12 times before replying. Friday, rooftop dinner. Dress nice. Simple message. But after 3 years together, she understood Robert well enough to know he rarely planned anything romantic without a reason, especially lately, which meant this mattered. Sophia sat motionless at her kitchen table while her coffee slowly turned cold beside her. Then she smiled. Not the playful smile she used when teasing Robert. Something softer, hopeful, and honestly, a little relieved, because the distance between them over the past few months had started scaring her more than she admitted out loud. But now maybe things were finally turning back toward them again. Sophia grabbed her phone immediately and called her closest friend. The second the call connected, she whispered dramatically, I think this man is about to ruin my emotional stability permanently. What happened? He booked a rooftop dinner. A loud scream exploded through the phone instantly. Sophia pulled the phone away from her ear, laughing. Oh my God, stop yelling. Did he say dress nice? Yes. Oh, he's proposing. Sophia laughed again, but her hands already felt nervous. That's what I thought too. You better not wear those little sneakers you love. Sophia looked offended immediately. They're comfortable. This is not a comfort occasion. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the end of it, Sophia somehow had 3 dress store recommendations, a nail appointment, 2 hairstyle suggestions, and very aggressive instructions about waterproof mascara. The entire thing felt ridiculous and wonderful. For the first time in months, Sophia let herself believe the tension between them had only been temporary, that maybe Robert was simply overwhelmed by work, that maybe love was still stronger than everything surrounding them. Meanwhile, Robert sat inside a conference room in Manhattan, staring at financial projections, while barely hearing a single word being said around him. One executive clicked through merger slides on a giant screen. Projected revenue, market expansion, investor expectations. Robert normally dominated meetings like this effortlessly. Today his concentration kept drifting toward Friday night instead, toward Sophia, toward the ring box, sitting unopened inside his desk drawer at home. Because the terrible truth was, Robert bought the ring months ago, before the pressure became overwhelming, before investors started questioning everything, before his mother's voice started echoing inside his head constantly. At the time, proposing felt easy, natural. Now every conversation around him carried hidden pressure. The executive beside him spoke carefully. The board is concerned about maintaining strong public confidence during the merger transition. Robert rubbed his jaw slowly. Public confidence in what? Leadership stability, image, future positioning. Another executive added casually. The media already watches your personal life closely. Robert looked toward him immediately. The man continued carefully. You know how these things work. Unfortunately, Robert did know too well. That was the problem. Friday night stopped feeling romantic inside his mind. It started feeling dangerous. That realization followed him everywhere afterward. At night, at meetings, inside elevators, during interviews. Sophia noticed it too. The next evening, they met for dinner in Harlem, at one of their usual neighborhood spots. Sophia arrived glowing with quiet excitement, even though she tried hiding it. Robert noticed immediately. You're smiling suspiciously. Sophia sat down across from him. I'm in a good mood. That's suspicious. You're lucky you're attractive. Robert laughed softly. God. He missed this version of them. The easy version. Sophia leaned forward while opening her menu dramatically. Okay, serious question. Robert already looked nervous. That introduction concerns me. If we ever get married. Robert nearly choked on his water. Sophia burst out laughing immediately. Oh, wow. You did that on purpose. Your face was incredible. Robert shook his head, smiling, despite himself. Sophia softened slightly afterward. I'm kidding. But the way she said it told him she wasn't fully kidding. That tightened something painfully inside his chest. The waitress approached their table moments later. Sophia ordered comfortably while Robert barely looked at the menu. You already know what I'm getting? Sophia asked. You always order the same thing here. Sophia stared at him for a second, then smiled quietly. You still remember? Robert frowned slightly. Of course, I remember. That answer mattered more to Sophia than he realized, because lately she had started fearing Robert was emotionally disappearing from their relationship piece by piece. Dinner itself felt almost normal again. Almost. Sophia joked about a catering client who tried putting raisins inside macaroni and cheese. Robert looked genuinely horrified. That should honestly be illegal. Thank you. For a few minutes they sounded like themselves again. And honestly, that made everything harder, because moments like that reminded Robert exactly what he stood to lose. Later that night, Robert drove Sophia home through quiet Manhattan streets, while rain tapped lightly against the windshield. Sophia rested comfortably against the passenger seat, watching city lights blur outside. You know, she said softly, I miss this. Robert glanced toward her briefly. What? Us feeling normal. Robert tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel. Sophia noticed immediately. You're doing it again. What? Thinking too hard. Robert forced a faint smile. Occupational hazard. Sophia studied him carefully, then reached over and rested her hand gently against his wrist. You know you can talk to me, right? Robert nodded once, but he still didn't speak, because how could he explain something he barely understood himself? How could he admit that powerful people had started making him question choices that once felt obvious. And worse, how could he admit part of him was actually listening? That shame followed Robert into Friday morning. By noon, his mother had already called twice. He ignored both calls. Then an investor requested an urgent meeting before dinner. Robert almost canceled, but the investor insisted. So by late afternoon, Robert sat inside a private office overlooking Midtown, while the investor spoke carefully across from him. "Tonight's important." Robert's expression remained guarded. "It's dinner. It's visibility." Robert already hated where the conversation was heading. The investor folded his hands calmly. The merger announcement happened soon. Every public appearance matters now. Robert stayed quiet. Then came the sentence he could feel arriving before it was even spoken. "You need stability around you." Robert looked away toward the window. The investor continued. "People at your level become symbols whether they like it or not." That word again. Level. As if human beings existed on emotional floors inside a building. Robert suddenly felt exhausted. Deeply exhausted. Because somewhere along the way, love had started sounding like a professional risk instead of a life. By evening, Sophia stood inside a dress boutique surrounded by mirrors while adjusting the fabric carefully against her waist. Her smile kept returning every few seconds without permission. The saleswoman clasped her hands dramatically. "Oh, he's definitely proposing." Sophia laughed nervously. "You don't know that, honey. Men only book rooftop dinners when they're apologizing or proposing." Sophia paused briefly. The apology part landed harder than expected, because deep down, she knew something had changed between them recently. But tonight felt different. Important. Like maybe Robert was finally choosing them fully. Sophia stepped in front of another mirror while smoothing the dress carefully. Then she imagined it. Engagement photos, future apartments, children, maybe growing older with somebody who once made subway rides feel romantic. That thought made her emotional unexpectedly. She blinked quickly before ruining her makeup. Meanwhile, Robert sat alone inside his penthouse staring at the ring box again, still unopened. The city glowed outside enormous windows, while silence filled the apartment. His phone buzzed repeatedly beside him. Investors. Executives. Emails. Pressure. Robert closed his eyes briefly, then finally opened the ring box, slowly. The diamond reflected softly under the apartment lights. Months ago, seeing it filled him with certainty. Tonight it filled him with panic. Because for the first time in his life, Robert realized fear could sound reasonable when enough powerful people repeated it constantly. Later that evening, Sophia arrived downstairs outside Robert's building, wearing the emerald dress she spent nearly an entire paycheck convincing herself to buy. Robert stepped out of the car the second he saw her, and for a moment, everything else disappeared from his mind. Sophia smiled nervously. "Well?" Robert stared at her quietly before answering. "You look beautiful." The sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm immediately. Sophia teased softly. "You clean up okay, too." But even while smiling, she noticed something. Robert looked tense again. Not unhappy, not distant exactly, just emotionally overwhelmed somehow. Sophia ignored the feeling. Tonight was too important for doubt. During the elevator ride upstairs toward the private rooftop restaurant, Sophia kept smoothing her dress nervously, while Robert stood unusually quiet beside her. "You're making me anxious," she admitted finally. Robert looked toward her. "Why?" "Because you've said maybe 12 words in the last 20 minutes. Robert tried smiling. "It's been a long week." Sophia stepped slightly closer beside him. "Well, whatever happens tonight." She paused briefly before continuing softly. "I'm really glad we found each other." That nearly broke Robert emotionally right there inside the elevator. Because despite everything, despite the pressure, despite the fear, he still loved her completely. And somewhere deep down, he already knew he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The elevator doors opened slowly. Sophia stepped forward smiling, then stopped completely. Both families were already there. Investors too. Champagne glasses, camera flashes, luxury skyline. behind glass walls. Sophia's breath caught instantly. Her hands began shaking, because suddenly, this no longer felt like dinner. It felt like the beginning of the rest of her life. The moment Sophia stepped onto the rooftop, her entire body filled with nervous excitement. Everything looked unreal. The Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly behind glass walls glowing gold against the night sky. Candlelight flickered across white tablecloths. A violinist played softly near the far corner, while waiters moved carefully through clusters of wealthy guests carrying champagne. And standing in the middle of it all was Robert. Sophia looked at him and honestly forgot how to breathe for a second. Not because of the suit, not because of the restaurant, not because of the luxury surrounding them. Because, despite all the tension lately, he was still the man who once rode the subway with her at midnight, just because she wanted cookies from Harlem. Still the man who danced badly in her kitchen. Still the man who once fell asleep on her couch with his shoes still on because he finally felt peaceful there. Sophia smiled slowly. This is it. Her chest tightened with happiness so sudden, it almost scared her. Robert walked toward her carefully. You okay? Sophia laughed nervously. You invited both families and half of Manhattan here. I think my blood pressure deserves privacy. A few nearby guests laughed softly. Robert smiled faintly. But even now, Sophia noticed something strange in his expression. Not coldness, not unhappiness, fear. At the time, she misunderstood it completely. She thought he was nervous about proposing. God, she wanted to believe that so badly. Robert guided her toward the center table overlooking the skyline, while guests greeted them warmly. His mother hugged him first. Then, Sophia, polite, controlled, elegant. Sophia noticed the stiffness immediately, but ignored it. Tonight was too important for insecurity. An investor approached, smiling broadly. Sophia, you look incredible tonight. Thank you, she replied warmly. Another guest lifted a champagne glass toward Robert. To the future? Sophia's stomach flipped instantly. Future. That word suddenly felt enormous. Throughout dinner, conversations floated around them. While waiters delivered expensive courses, Sophia barely tasted because anxiety kept twisting through her chest. She kept noticing small things. Robert adjusting his cuff repeatedly, barely touching his food, forcing smiles too slowly, checking the room constantly. Sophia leaned toward him quietly during one pause. You're terrifying me. Robert looked at her. That wasn't my intention. You look like you're about to announce a corporate bankruptcy. That earned a real laugh from him. Small, but real. Sophia relaxed slightly after hearing it. There he is. For a second, the version of Robert she loved returned again. But only for a second. Across the table, guests continued drinking and laughing, while cameras flashed occasionally for social media posts and charity coverage. One executive joked loudly, if Robert looks any more nervous tonight, somebody should check his stock prices. More laughter spread around the table. Sophia smiled while reaching for her champagne glass carefully because her hands already felt shaky. Then, another guest leaned back in his chair grinning. So Robert, the entire table slowly quieted. The man raised his glass casually. When's the wedding? Laughter exploded immediately. Several people clapped. One woman gasped dramatically. Someone shouted, finally. Sophia laughed too at first. Just a nervous little laugh. Then she looked toward Robert, and her smile faded almost instantly. Because Robert looked frozen, not surprised, not playful, frozen. His fingers tightened slowly around the champagne glass. His jaw flexed once. The laughter around the table weakened little by little, as people noticed his expression changing. Sophia felt her heartbeat suddenly becoming louder. Robert cleared his throat softly, then looked down briefly before speaking. I'm not ready for marriage. The sentence landed like broken glass across the table. Nobody moved. Nobody even reacted immediately. It was too uncomfortable. Sophia blinked once slowly, like maybe she heard him incorrectly. A strange heat climbed into her chest. One guest laughed awkwardly, trying to rescue the moment. Oh, come on, Robert. Nobody joined the laughter. The room felt emotionally unstable now. Sophia forced a tiny smile anyway, because public embarrassment does something cruel to people. It makes them perform calmness while falling apart internally. Robert still wouldn't fully look at her. That terrified her immediately. One older investor raised his drink with an uncomfortable chuckle. "Smart man," he joked. "Marriage can get expensive." A few weak laughs followed. Sophia heard them, every single one. Her fingers tightened slowly around the stem of her glass. Then Robert made the mistake that destroyed everything completely. He exhaled quietly before speaking again. "My world is complicated," he said carefully. "Love alone isn't enough." Sophia stared at him, and suddenly, everything became painfully clear. Not polished enough. Not wealthy enough. Not acceptable enough for this room. For these people. For his world. The humiliation hit her physically, like her chest actually collapsed inward. Nobody spoke now. Even the violinist near the corner had stopped playing. Sophia looked around slowly at the wealthy faces surrounding her. Some uncomfortable, some embarrassed, some pretending not to watch. And the worst part? Nobody seemed surprised, as if they all understood something she was only realizing right now. Sophia swallowed hard while trying to keep herself together. 3 years. 3 entire years. And somehow she was still standing outside his world, emotionally begging for entrance without realizing it. Sophia looked back toward Robert. His silence hurt more than the rejection itself, because she could actually see the conflict inside him. He loved her. She knew he did, but he was still choosing fear anyway. That realization broke something inside her quietly. Sophia finally spoke, very softly. So after 3 years, her voice nearly cracked. She steadied it carefully before continuing. "I still don't fit into your world." Robert opened his mouth slightly, then stopped. No answer came, not even a lie. And honestly, that silence humiliated her more than anything else that night. Sophia nodded once to herself slowly, like she finally understood something painful. Around the table, guests suddenly became fascinated with their drinks, their phones, the skyline, literally anything except her face. Nobody wanted to acknowledge the heartbreak happening directly in front of them. Sophia stood carefully from her chair. Her hands trembled while reaching for her purse. Robert watched her, but he still didn't stop her. Not publicly. Not when it mattered. Sophia gave one tiny broken smile, the kind people give right before crying somewhere private. Then she turned and walked away from the table. Every step felt heavier than the last. The elevator ride downstairs felt endless. Sophia kept staring forward while fighting tears aggressively because strangers stood beside her the entire ride. The second the elevator doors opened into the lobby, she broke. Not loudly, just one sharp inhale that collapsed into shaking breath. Outside, cold rain hit the streets of Manhattan hard enough to blur headlights into streaks of gold and white. Sophia walked blindly through it. Her heels slipped against wet pavement, while mascara burned beneath her eyes. People rushed past her holding umbrellas, without noticing the woman trying not to fall apart emotionally in the middle of the sidewalk. Her phone buzzed repeatedly inside her purse. Friends. Probably waiting for engagement photos. Sophia couldn't even look. Rain soaked through her dress, while memories attacked her all at once. Dancing in her kitchen with Robert, rooftop conversations, late-night subway rides, the way he once watched her like she mattered more than anything else in his life. How did they end up here? Sophia stopped briefly near a storefront window and caught her reflection. For a second, she barely recognized herself. She looked humiliated. That realization finally brought tears fully spilling down her face. A taxi slowed beside the curb nearby. The driver lowered the window halfway. "You getting in? Or finishing your dramatic movie scene first?" Sophia laughed through tears unexpectedly. The sound broke apart halfway out. The driver pointed toward the back seat. "Come on. You're making sadness look expensive out here." Sophia climbed inside carefully while trying to steady her breathing. The taxi smelled like peppermint and rain-soaked fabric. Soft music played quietly through the speakers. The driver glanced toward her through the mirror. "Bad date?" Sophia stared out the window silently for a second, then answered quietly, "Something like that." The driver nodded like he already understood more than she explained. Outside, Manhattan lights reflected across wet streets while traffic crawled through the rain. Sophia wiped under her eyes carefully, then whispered almost to herself, "He said love wasn't enough." The driver made a face immediately. Oof. That one reaction nearly made her cry harder. The driver shook his head slowly. Rich people always confuse money with wisdom. Sophia looked down at her trembling hands. And honestly, that should have been the moment she hated Robert. But heartbreak is complicated, because underneath the humiliation, underneath the anger, underneath the embarrassment, she still loved him. Meanwhile, back at the rooftop restaurant, Robert sat frozen in his chair long after Sophia left. Nobody knew what to say anymore. The atmosphere felt emotionally poisoned. One executive cleared his throat awkwardly. Another guest quietly checked their phone. Robert's mother looked disappointed. Not in Sophia. In him. That somehow made everything worse. Robert stared toward the empty elevator doors where Sophia disappeared minutes earlier. His chest felt tight enough to hurt physically, because deep down, he already knew exactly what he had done. He didn't reject Sophia because he stopped loving her. He rejected her because fear finally became louder than courage. And now the woman who made his life feel human again was gone. The dinner ended awkwardly soon afterward. Nobody stayed long. Nobody even pretended the night could recover. Hours later, Robert sat alone inside his penthouse apartment, still wearing the same suit. The city glowed outside enormous windows. His untouched drink rested near the counter. Silence filled every room. But tonight, the silence felt cruel. Robert walked slowly toward the kitchen, then stopped suddenly. Sophia's favorite mug still sat beside the sink from earlier that week. That tiny detail nearly destroyed him emotionally, because suddenly memories existed everywhere. Her laugh, her voice, her warmth. Robert lowered himself slowly onto the couch and covered his face with both hands. For the first time in years, he genuinely hated himself. The narrator speaks softly. If you've ever been embarrassed by somebody you trusted, subscribe to the channel, because Sophia's story is about to change in ways nobody at that table expected. Across the city, Sophia finally reached her apartment just before 2 a.m. Her makeup was ruined. Her feet hurt. Her chest still felt hollow. She kicked off her heels near the doorway and stood motionless inside the dark apartment. Everything reminded her of Robert. The couch where he slept peacefully. The kitchen where they danced. The music speaker he once mocked for being emotionally aggressive. Sophia finally collapsed onto the floor, crying quietly into both hands. Not graceful crying. Real crying. The kind that leaves people exhausted afterward. Eventually, sometime near dawn, she grabbed her phone with trembling fingers, opened Robert's contact, stared at his name silently, then pressed delete. The contact disappeared instantly. Sophia swallowed hard, then opened her photo gallery. Hundreds of pictures. Harlem nights, subway rides, kitchen dancing, smiling faces, peace. Sophia's thumb hovered above the delete button, but she couldn't do it, because no matter how badly Robert hurt her tonight, every memory still felt real. The apartment stayed quiet for days after the breakup. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that made every little sound feel too loud. The refrigerator humming, water pipes shifting inside the walls, traffic outside at 3 a.m. Sophia noticed all of it now, because Robert's absence sat everywhere. Inside the kitchen where they used to dance, on the couch where he once fell asleep during movies. He claimed he wasn't emotionally invested in. Even the coffee mugs felt wrong somehow. The first week after the rooftop dinner, Sophia barely left the apartment unless she absolutely had to. Friends called constantly. She ignored most of them, not because she didn't love them, because she couldn't survive repeating the story over and over again. What happened? Are you okay? I can't believe he did that. Neither could she. That was the problem. One afternoon, Sophia finally forced herself to clean the apartment because grief had started turning the place into emotional evidence. Robert's hoodie still hung behind the bedroom door. She stared at it for almost a full minute before grabbing it carefully. At first she intended to throw it into a donation bag. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed holding it against herself while trying not to cry again. Honestly, heartbreak embarrassed her now. Not because she missed Robert, because she missed somebody who publicly failed to protect her. That realization hurt differently. Sophia eventually shoved the hoodie into the back of her closet before standing quickly like distance alone could fix the feeling. Then she opened every apartment window. Despite the cold, fresh air, movement, anything except memories sitting still. But memories followed her everywhere anyway. A subway ride reminded her of Robert pretending to hate public transportation while secretly enjoying it. A song inside a grocery store pulled her backward emotionally before she could stop it. Even chopped cheese sandwiches became dangerous. One night, Sophia walked past the Harlem restaurant where they used to eat together. She froze outside the window. Same lights, same counter, same music drifting outside. For a second, she almost walked in. Then she saw a couple laughing near the back table where she and Robert used to sit. Sophia kept walking immediately, fast, her chest tightening the entire way home. That became her new routine afterward, avoiding pieces of her old life carefully. Certain blocks, certain restaurants, certain songs. Healing started looking less like strength and more like survival. Financial stress arrived not long after. Sophia still worked nonprofit events occasionally, but after the breakup, concentrating became harder than she expected. One coordinator asked her 3 separate questions during a planning meeting before Sophia even realized people were waiting for answers. "You good?" the woman finally asked carefully. Sophia forced a quick smile. "Yeah, just tired." Everybody says tired when the truth sounds too difficult. Bills continued arriving whether her heart healed or not. Rent, transportation, groceries, utilities. Life stayed practical, even while emotions collapsed. So Sophia pushed herself harder. Catering jobs, private events, late-night baking orders, anything that kept her busy long enough to stop thinking. At first, baking became escape more than ambition. Something about measuring ingredients helped quiet her mind temporarily. Sugar, butter, timing, structure. Recipes made sense when emotions didn't. Most nights, Sophia worked alone in small rented kitchen spaces long after midnight, preparing dessert trays for tiny corporate gatherings and neighborhood birthdays. The work exhausted her physically, but exhaustion helped, because tired people sleep eventually, usually. One early morning around 2 a.m., Sophia sat alone on a metal counter, eating leftover cheesecake directly from the container while reviewing unpaid invoices. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Flour dust covered part of her black sweatshirt, and for the first time since the breakup, she admitted something quietly to herself. She felt lost, not dramatically, not movie scene lost, just emotionally disconnected from the version of herself she used to recognize. Sophia looked toward her phone sitting beside the counter. Robert's number was gone, but memory remained dangerous, because she still knew it by heart. That scared her. She picked up the phone once, then immediately put it back down again. "No," she whispered to herself firmly, because healing sometimes starts with refusing to reopen wounds. The hardest part wasn't losing Robert completely. The hardest part was remembering how safe she once felt with him. That comparison ruined ordinary loneliness. Months passed slowly. Not beautifully, not inspirationally, just slowly. Sophia picked up more catering work whenever possible. Some events went well. Others became disasters. At one engagement party, the venue lost electricity halfway through dessert service. Another client changed the menu 4 separate times, then complained about pricing afterward. One wealthy woman tasted Sophia's dessert samples before saying, "These are good. Did you actually make them yourself?" Sophia smiled politely, because some people hear success differently, depending on who's speaking. By the time she returned home that night, Her feet hurt badly enough she sat on the apartment floor near the doorway instead of walking to the couch. For a few seconds, she simply stayed there staring at nothing, then laughed quietly to herself. Not happy laughter, more disbelief at how adulthood keeps moving, no matter how emotionally exhausted people become. Still, little by little, Sophia kept going. That mattered. Even on mornings, she didn't want to leave bed. Even on nights, loneliness sat heavily beside her. Even during moments, she questioned whether Robert secretly agreed with everything those wealthy people believed about her. Those thoughts hurt most, not because she truly believed she lacked value, because humiliation makes people temporarily see themselves through other people's cruelty. One afternoon, Sophia stood inside a grocery store debating whether she could afford extra vanilla extract for a dessert order. She checked her bank balance twice before placing the smaller bottle into her basket instead. That moment nearly broke her emotionally, not because of the money, because Robert once spent more than that amount on wine without thinking. Sophia suddenly hated herself for comparing lives again. She pushed the cart harder than necessary afterward. Later that night, while packaging dessert boxes for a small fundraiser, Sophia accidentally dropped one entire tray onto the kitchen floor. Silence. She stared at the ruined desserts for a second, then sat down right there on the floor beside them and cried. Not over the desserts, over everything. The exhaustion, the loneliness, the pressure, the rebuilding. Nobody talks honestly enough about how tiring healing becomes, especially when people expect strength from you before you fully recover. Sophia wiped her face eventually and cleaned the mess anyway, because rent still existed. Orders still needed delivery. Life still moved. That became the year after Robert. Survival through repetition. Wake up. Work. Avoid memories. Pretend progress felt faster than it actually was. But slowly, very slowly, small changes started happening. Sophia laughed more naturally again. Started answering friends' calls occasionally. Returned to neighborhood cookouts. Played music while baking again. Not because pain disappeared, because she learned pain could exist without controlling every moment. One evening during a community fundraiser in Harlem, Sophia handed out free dessert samples to families while children ran through folding tables nearby, laughing loudly. A little girl took one bite of Sophia's peach cobbler cupcake and gasped dramatically. "Oh my God." Sophia laughed. "That's serious?" The little girl nodded aggressively. "You put happiness in this." Sophia nearly cried from that sentence alone. Instead, she smiled warmly and handed the girl another cupcake. "Don't tell anybody my secret ingredient." For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt useful again. Not impressive, not glamorous, just meaningful. And honestly, that mattered more. A few weeks later, Sophia catered a small networking event for wealthy professionals downtown. Nothing major, just another job. Near the end of the evening, one older woman stopped beside the dessert table after tasting Sophia's caramel cake, then took another bite immediately. "Who made this?" Sophia looked up from packing supplies. "I did." The woman stared at her briefly. "This is one of the best desserts I've had in years." Sophia smiled politely. "Thank you." Most compliments ended there. This one didn't. The woman pulled out her phone. "What's your business name?" Sophia blinked in surprise before answering. By midnight, the woman had already posted photos online praising Sophia's desserts publicly. And by the next morning, people started sharing it. Sophia didn't realize the online post was changing her life at first. The morning after the networking event, she woke up late on her couch with flour still on one sleeve of her sweatshirt and 3 missed calls from an unknown number. At first, she ignored them. Unknown numbers usually meant spam calls, clients asking for discounts, or people wanting exposure opportunities instead of actual payment. Sophia rolled over and checked social media half awake, then blinked hard. Notifications kept climbing faster than normal. Comments, shares, messages. The wealthy woman from the networking event had posted pictures of Sophia's dessert table beside a caption calling her caramel cake the most emotionally comforting thing in Manhattan. Sophia laughed quietly at the wording, then stopped laughing when she saw how many people were sharing it. Thousands. Her phone buzzed again immediately. Another catering request. Then another. Then another. Sophia sat upright slowly. What the hell? For the first time in over a year, something good arrived unexpectedly. Not magically. Not overnight success. But opportunity. Real opportunity. That week became chaos. Sophia barely slept while responding to messages, pricing dessert orders, organizing schedules, and trying not to panic every time another request appeared. One client wanted luxury cupcakes for a fashion launch. Another requested custom desserts for a charity brunch. A small boutique hotel asked whether she handled private events. Sophia answered everything carefully from her tiny apartment kitchen, while balancing spreadsheets beside mixing bowls. At one point, she burned an entire tray of cookies because she forgot they were still inside the oven while replying to emails. Smoke filled the apartment instantly. Sophia opened windows dramatically while coughing. "This is what success smells like," she muttered to herself. Despite the exhaustion, something inside her slowly started returning again. Energy, purpose, belief. Not the version connected to Robert, her own version. That difference mattered. Months passed. Business improved gradually, instead of unrealistically. Sophia still struggled financially sometimes, still worked exhausting hours, still handled difficult clients, still doubted herself occasionally. But now there were also repeat customers, positive reviews, referrals, community support, growing confidence. The first time somebody called her Chef Sophia, she looked behind herself, assuming they meant another person. The man laughed immediately. "I'm talking to you." Sophia pointed at her chest. "Oh, right. Sorry." Still emotionally adjusting. That humor started returning naturally again. Not forced, not defensive. Healthier. One Saturday afternoon, Sophia organized a small community dessert event in Harlem for young girls interested in baking. Nothing expensive. Just folding tables, music, cupcakes, and too much powdered sugar everywhere. The room felt alive. Kids laughed while decorating cookies badly. Music played loudly from portable speakers. Somebody spilled frosting on the floor within 15 minutes. Sophia looked happier than she had in years. One teenager stayed behind after the workshop ended, watching Sophia package leftovers. "You really built all this yourself?" Sophia paused briefly before answering. "Not alone." The girl looked confused. Sophia smiled softly. "People helped me when I was struggling too." That became important to her afterward. The more business improved, the more Sophia hired women from difficult situations around the neighborhood. Single mothers, women rebuilding financially, young women needing stable work, not charity. Opportunity. Because Sophia understood what emotional survival looked like when life embarrassed you publicly, and she never forgot it. One evening, while preparing desserts with 2 employees inside a rented kitchen space, one woman asked casually, "So what made you start all this?" Sophia kept frosting cupcakes quietly before answering. "Heartbreak." The room became quiet for half a second. Then, Sophia laughed softly. "I'm serious." One employee pointed toward the desserts. "This level of emotional damage tastes expensive." Everybody laughed, including Sophia. And honestly, that laugh sounded lighter now. The pain still existed, but it no longer controlled every room she entered. That was growth. Not forgetting, not pretending. Just surviving long enough to become yourself again. As Sophia's business expanded, luxury Manhattan spaces slowly started noticing her work more seriously. The irony almost made her laugh every time. The same type of wealthy people who once spoke over her at events now requested personalized dessert menus, consultations, private tastings, exclusive catering experiences. But Sophia handled those rooms differently now. Calmer. Not because she suddenly wanted elite approval, because she stopped fearing rejection from people who judged worth through money. That emotional shift changed everything. One evening during a luxury engagement party downtown, a wealthy guest asked where Sophia trained professionally. Sophia smiled while arranging desserts carefully. "Mostly from my grandmother, and financial stress. The woman burst out laughing. Old Sophia would have worried whether the joke sounded polished enough. Now, she didn't care. And strangely, people respected her more because of it. Her authenticity became magnetic. Clients started describing her desserts the same way. Warm, comforting, personal, human, one food blogger wrote. Her desserts feel like memories instead of performances. That sentence spread online quickly. Sophia read it twice quietly before putting the phone down. Because deep down, she understood exactly why people connected emotionally to her work. She baked from experience now. Loss, healing, loneliness, joy, memory. Everything carried feeling. Meanwhile, Harlem still remained home. That never changed. Sophia still bought groceries from the same neighborhood stores, still danced while cooking, still attended local block parties, still laughed loudly enough for strangers to turn around sometimes. Success never removed the version of herself Robert originally fell in love with. It just strengthened her confidence inside it. One summer afternoon, Sophia stood outside her bakery pop-up window serving desserts during a street festival, while music blasted through the neighborhood. The line stretched halfway down the block. A man near the front looked overwhelmed reading the menu. Sophia leaned forward dramatically. "Sir, it's cake, not a mortgage contract." People nearby laughed immediately. The man pointed nervously toward the options. "There's pressure." Sophia nodded sympathetically. "Understandable. Wrong dessert decisions ruin families." Another customer shouted from the line, "She bullied me into buying peach cobbler last week, and honestly, worth it?" Sophia laughed loudly. That warmth returned fully now. Not because life became easy, because she rebuilt herself honestly. Later that evening, after cleanup finished, Sophia sat alone outside the closed pop-up shop, eating leftover banana pudding directly from the container while exhausted. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. Her phone still buzzed constantly with business notifications. But for once, the exhaustion felt meaningful instead of empty. Sophia looked around Harlem quietly. Kids riding bikes, music drifting from apartment windows, somebody arguing loudly 3 buildings away about parking. Home. She smiled softly to herself. Then her phone buzzed again. Another email. Sophia opened it casually and immediately froze. The message came from a luxury Manhattan charity foundation. Formal. Professional. They requested Sophia personally for an upcoming high-profile gala event. Sophia reread the email slowly because she recognized the organization instantly. The exact social world that once looked at her like she didn't belong was now inviting her in professionally. Not as Robert's girlfriend, as Sophia. And somehow, that felt bigger than success itself. While Sophia slowly rebuilt herself through exhaustion, long nights, and stubborn resilience, Robert buried himself inside work so deeply he almost disappeared into it. At first, success distracted him effectively. The merger finally went through. Financial magazines praised his leadership. Investors celebrated aggressively. Business interviews multiplied. Publicly, Robert Hayes looked untouchable. That version of him photographed well. Sharp suits, luxury penthouse, corporate confidence, calculated interviews. But privately, his life became painfully mechanical. Wake up, meetings, emails, interviews, flights, corporate dinners. Repeat. Every day blurred into the next, until time itself started feeling emotionally flat. And the worst part? Nobody around him noticed anything wrong, because wealthy loneliness often hides behind expensive distractions. One morning, Robert stood inside his massive penthouse kitchen, staring at an untouched cup of coffee while Manhattan glowed outside enormous windows. Silence filled the apartment. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence. The kind Sophia used to interrupt naturally, just by existing. Robert checked the time automatically. 6:12 a.m. 3 years ago, Sophia probably would have been dancing badly in his kitchen, already making fun of his expensive coffee machine. Now, nothing moved except city traffic below him. Robert suddenly realized he hadn't played music inside the apartment in months. That thought unsettled him more than expected. Later that afternoon, Robert sat through another executive meeting discussing expansion strategies while barely paying attention. One executive spoke enthusiastically about profit projections. Another discussed branding opportunities. Robert nodded at the correct moments automatically. But mentally, he drifted elsewhere. Toward Harlem. Toward subway rides. Toward tiny moments he once treated casually. The way Sophia laughed with her whole body. The way she talked during movies. The way she made ordinary nights feel important somehow. Robert blinked back toward the meeting suddenly when somebody called his name. "You good?" Robert straightened slightly. "Fine." That answer became routine. Fine. Busy. Tired. Words people use when they don't want emotional conversations. At night, Robert occasionally attempted dating again, mostly because people around him kept encouraging it. Investors introduced wealthy women. Executives arranged dinners. His mother suggested better matches carefully without directly mentioning Sophia anymore. Robert tried. Honestly, he did. One woman spent an entire dinner discussing vacation properties and luxury brands while Robert stared blankly at the restaurant candle, wondering whether Sophia would roast the place for charging $40 for mashed potatoes. Another date complimented his penthouse for nearly 20 minutes straight. Sophia once mocked the same apartment by saying, "This place looks like a billionaire forgot furniture needs personality." Robert accidentally smiled, remembering it. The woman across from him misunderstood immediately. "I knew you liked the artwork." Robert's smile disappeared. The relationships never lasted long. Not because the women were terrible, because none of them felt emotionally real. Everything sounded polished, careful, safe. Sophia never sounded safe. She sounded alive. That difference haunted him constantly. One winter evening, Robert returned home after another charity dinner and loosened his tie while walking through the apartment. Halfway toward the kitchen, he stopped suddenly, because for one ridiculous second, he thought he smelled Sophia's cooking. Garlic, butter, seasoning. Robert stood motionless, before realizing the scent came from a neighboring apartment downstairs. Still, his chest tightened painfully anyway. That became the dangerous part of losing Sophia. She remained hidden inside ordinary things. Song subway stations. Peach cobbler, old R&B music, kitchen laughter, late-night rain. Even success itself started feeling emptier because she wasn't there to humanize it anymore. One night after a major business awards ceremony, Robert sat alone in the backseat of his car while his phone exploded with congratulatory messages. Best CEO. Visionary leadership. Historic growth. Robert stared at the glowing city outside silently, then muttered to himself, "She would have made fun of this speech." The driver glanced toward the mirror briefly but said nothing. Robert looked down at his phone again. For a second, he almost searched Sophia's name online. He stopped himself, then did it anyway. Her business appeared immediately. Professional photos, dessert events, community outreach programs, interviews. Robert scrolled slowly through images of Sophia laughing at charity events and smiling beside customers. She looked happy, not pretending, actually happy. That realization hurt unexpectedly, because somewhere deep down, Robert always imagined Sophia stayed emotionally frozen after him too. Seeing her move forward forced him to confront something ugly. Sophia survived losing him, but Robert never truly survived losing her. Meanwhile, inside his company, changes slowly started appearing too. Employees became colder around him. Meetings became more tense. Turnover increased. People still respected Robert, but fewer people trusted him emotionally now. One longtime employee resigned after 10 years with the company. During their exit conversation, the man hesitated before speaking honestly. "You used to care more about people." Robert looked up slowly. "What's that supposed to mean?" The employee shifted uncomfortably. "Nothing disrespectful." "Then, say it clearly." The man exhaled quietly. "Before the merger, you felt different." Robert stayed silent, because, unfortunately, he already knew exactly what the man meant. Sophia once told him, Success becomes dangerous when people stop feeling human around you. At the time, Robert laughed it off. Now, the sentence replayed inside his head constantly. Another night, Robert arrived home exhausted after midnight and walked through the apartment loosening his tie automatically. He stopped near the living room. Sophia's old playlist still existed on the television music app. Robert stared at it for several seconds, then pressed play before he could stop himself. Old R&B filled the apartment softly, and suddenly the place felt haunted by memory. Robert sat heavily onto the couch. The same couch where Sophia once fell asleep beside him after forcing him to watch terrible reality television for character development. A small laugh escaped him unexpectedly, then disappeared just as quickly, because memory without presence becomes its own kind of loneliness. Hours later, Robert stood alone beside the massive windows overlooking Manhattan, while music drifted quietly behind him. And for the first time in years, he admitted the truth fully to himself. He did not lose Sophia because she was poor, or unpolished, or incompatible with his world. He lost her because fear made him weak. That realization arrived too late to fix anything. The narrator speaks softly. Some people destroy their own happiness slowly, then act surprised when loneliness finally arrives. 5 years passed that way, success growing, loneliness growing faster. Then one evening, Robert attended another luxury charity gala in Manhattan, expecting absolutely nothing emotionally significant from the night. Just another ballroom, another speech, another fundraiser full of wealthy people pretending exhaustion was ambition. He adjusted his cuff while walking through the entrance distractedly. Champagne glasses clinked nearby. Cameras flashed. Executives laughed too loudly. Robert barely noticed any of it until he heard a laugh. One laugh, warm, familiar, alive. Robert froze instantly. His entire body reacted before his thoughts caught up, because no matter how many years passed, he would have recognized Sophia's laugh anywhere in New York. Slowly, Robert turned toward the sound, and everything inside him stopped. Robert turned toward the sound slowly, and there she was. Sophia stood near the center of the ballroom, speaking with 2 guests beside an enormous dessert display carrying gold details and soft candle lighting. For a second, Robert genuinely forgot where he was. 5 years disappeared instantly. Not emotionally, not logically, physically, like his body recognized her before his mind could catch up. Sophia laughed again at something one of the guests said, and the sound hit Robert with almost painful familiarity. Same laugh. Still warm. Still alive. Still impossible to ignore. But everything else about her had changed. Not dramatically. That was what shocked him most. Sophia didn't look transformed in the artificial way wealthy Manhattan women often tried to become transformed. She still looked like herself, only calmer now. More grounded inside her own skin. Her confidence no longer arrived loudly through jokes and energy alone. Now it existed quietly too. In the way she stood. In the way people listened when she spoke. In the ease of her smile. And somehow, that made her even more beautiful than before. Robert stayed frozen near the ballroom entrance, longer than necessary. An executive walking past nearly bumped into him. "You all right?" Robert barely heard him, because across the room, wealthy guests, who once would have ignored Sophia completely, now surrounded her comfortably. One woman touched Sophia's arm while laughing warmly. Another guest complimented the dessert display enthusiastically. Even investors Robert recognized from major corporate circles seemed eager for her attention. The irony hit him hard enough to feel physical. 5 years ago, this exact world made Sophia feel small. Now the same people admired her openly, and suddenly Robert understood something deeply humiliating about himself. Sophia never lacked value. The people around him simply lacked the ability to recognize it early, including him. Sophia picked up a champagne glass from a passing tray while still speaking to guests. Then her eyes lifted casually across the ballroom and landed directly on Robert. Everything stopped. Not theatrically, quietly. Sophia's smile faded first. Not completely, just enough. Enough for Robert to see recognition arrive in real time. Enough for her body to still slightly. Enough for 5 years of unfinished emotion to suddenly exist between them again. Neither of them looked away immediately. That almost felt dangerous, because eye contact with somebody you once loved deeply can become its own kind of conversation. Robert noticed the smallest change in her expression. Surprise first, then caution, then something softer she hid almost instantly afterward. Sophia recovered emotionally faster than he did. Of course she did. She lifted her champagne glass politely toward him from across the ballroom before returning to her conversation. Calm, composed, controlled. Robert's chest tightened unexpectedly, because 5 years ago, Sophia would have walked directly toward him smiling without hesitation. Now she protected herself first. And honestly, he deserved that. A waiter approached Robert moments later offering champagne. Robert took one automatically without looking. His hand felt colder than usual. Across the ballroom, Sophia finally excused herself from the guests surrounding her and moved toward another dessert table near the far side of the event. Robert watched her go, then immediately hated himself for doing exactly that again. Watching instead of acting. Fear had already destroyed enough. So before he could overthink himself into silence again, Robert crossed the ballroom toward her. Sophia noticed him approaching halfway there. Her posture shifted slightly. Not defensive, prepared. That difference mattered. Robert stopped a few feet away, close enough to smell her perfume faintly, close enough to remember entirely too much at once. For a second, neither of them spoke. The ballroom noise blurred strangely around them. Then Sophia smiled politely. Robert, hearing his name and her voice again, nearly ruined his ability to think clearly. You look. Robert stopped briefly. Careful. Don't sound emotional immediately. You look good. Sophia laughed softly. That sounded heavily edited. Robert smiled faintly, despite himself. I'm trying not to make this awkward. We're way past awkward. Fair point. Sophia glanced toward the ballroom briefly before looking back at him. You look tired. Robert blinked once, then laughed quietly under his breath. Still analyzing people? Only emotionally exhausted rich men. God, even that tiny callback nearly destroyed him, because suddenly he remembered Brooklyn again. Sparkling water, the charity gala, her laughing near the entrance. Sophia noticed the memory hit him immediately. That realization softened her expression for half a second before she hit it again. Robert looked toward the dessert displays nearby. These are yours? Sophia nodded. Most of them. Robert studied the room again. People genuinely admired her work. Not performatively. Not politely. Seriously. I heard your business has become impossible to book. Sophia shrugged lightly. I worked really hard for that. The sentence landed softly between them, but Robert heard the deeper meaning immediately. I rebuilt myself after you broke me. Sophia never said those words directly. She didn't need to. Robert looked down briefly before answering quietly. I can see that. Another pause settled between them. Not empty. Heavy. Sophia took a sip of champagne carefully while Robert studied her face. The biggest difference wasn't success. It was peace. 5 years ago, Sophia constantly looked outward emotionally, trying to connect, trying to soften rooms, trying to earn acceptance. Now, she looked emotionally anchored inside herself. That realization made Robert proud and devastated at the same time. A wealthy guest approached, suddenly smiling toward Sophia. Everybody's obsessed with your caramel cake. Sophia laughed. That's because sugar manipulates people emotionally. The guest laughed loudly. Robert smiled automatically. Still the same Sophia underneath everything. The guest finally noticed Robert properly. Oh wow. Robert Hayes. Robert extended a polite hand. The man shook it enthusiastically before turning back toward Sophia almost immediately. You didn't tell me you knew each other. Sophia answered calmly. We go way back. Way back. Such a harmless phrase, and somehow it still hurt. The guest continued talking excitedly about dessert orders, while Robert stood there realizing something strange. Nobody here viewed Sophia as somebody trying to fit into wealthy spaces anymore. She belonged naturally now, not because she changed herself, because she stopped needing permission. Eventually, the guest moved away again. Sophia exhaled lightly afterward. You surviving? Robert gave a dry smile. Honestly? Not really. That answer slipped out more honestly than intended. Sophia looked at him carefully for a second, then looked away first. That small reaction mattered, because, despite everything, part of her still felt him too. Robert cleared his throat softly. I didn't expect to see you tonight. Sophia raised an eyebrow. You forgot Manhattan only hosts 6 charity galas total? That earned a real laugh from him. Sophia smiled slightly after hearing it. There it is. That familiar sound again. The laugh she once loved pulling out of him. Robert looked at her longer than intended afterward. Sophia noticed immediately. You're staring. Sorry. No, you're not. Robert almost denied it, then stopped, because she already knew him too well for lies. Sophia folded one arm loosely against herself. You look successful. Robert laughed quietly. That sounded depressing, somehow. It wasn't meant to be. But, Sophia hesitated briefly, then answered honestly. You used to look happier. The sentence hit harder than any insult could have, because she said it gently, like observation, instead of accusation. Robert looked away toward the ballroom lights briefly. I probably was. Sophia's expression shifted slightly after hearing that. Not satisfaction. Sadness. Because despite everything he did, he was still the man she once loved. And that complicated everything emotionally. Music drifted softly through the ballroom, while guests continued laughing nearby. But standing there with Sophia again made the rest of the room feel emotionally distant. Robert suddenly noticed something else too. She no longer reached toward him unconsciously while talking. No playful touches. No leaning closer naturally. That intimacy disappeared, and the absence of it hurt more than he expected. Sophia checked the time briefly on her phone. I should probably get back to work before rich people start emotionally collapsing over missing desserts. Robert smiled automatically again. Then the smile faded slightly, when he realized she was about to walk away. After 5 years, after everything, this couldn't just end with polite conversation. Sophia, she paused. Robert looked at her carefully. There were 1,000 things he wanted to say. I'm sorry. I was weak. I never stopped loving you. I ruined everything. Instead, he asked the safest question possible. Are you happy? Sophia looked genuinely surprised by it. Not because of the question itself, because of how quietly he asked it. The ballroom reflected softly in her eyes while she considered the answer. Then she smiled. Not performatively. Honestly, I worked really hard for that. Same sentence. Different meaning this time. And somehow, it hurt Robert even more, because he realized happiness no longer depended on him. Sophia gave him one final polite smile afterward, then stepped backward carefully. It was good seeing you, Robert. Before he could answer, she turned and walked away through the ballroom. Elegant, calm, untouchable, in a way she never used to be. Robert watched her disappear into another crowd of laughing guests, and suddenly understood something terrifying with absolute clarity. He still loved her, completely. After the charity gala, Robert told himself he needed distance. That lasted less than a week. On Tuesday morning, he sat inside his office pretending to review quarterly reports while rereading an email from Sophia for the 4th time. Professional, brief, careful. She had agreed to discuss a possible partnership between her dessert company and one of Robert's community outreach foundations. The email contained no emotional warmth, no playful teasing, no lingering conversation, just logistics. And somehow, that made Robert more nervous than anger would have, because politeness creates distance. Sophia used to feel emotionally close, even during arguments. Now every sentence sounded measured. Robert stared toward the city outside his office windows before finally standing. He needed coffee, or therapy, possibly both. Later that afternoon, Robert arrived early at a small cafe in Harlem, where Sophia suggested they meet. That detail alone unsettled him emotionally. 5 years later, and she still preferred Harlem over luxury Manhattan spaces whenever possible. Some things never changed. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and espresso while soft music played through old ceiling speakers. Robert checked his watch twice before Sophia walked inside wearing a long cream-colored coat and carrying 2 phones, a notebook, and visible exhaustion. She spotted him immediately. "You came early." Robert stood automatically. "You noticed? You used to do that whenever you were nervous." That nearly made him smile. Sophia sat across from him and placed both phones on the table carefully. "Sorry in advance if work interrupts. One of my employees nearly burned frosting this morning." Robert blinked. "That sounds aggressive." She described it as emotionally overcooked. Robert laughed quietly before catching himself. Sophia noticed. "You still laugh the same." Robert looked at her for a second longer than intended. "You still notice everything." A waitress arrived for their order. Sophia requested coffee and banana bread casually before glancing toward Robert. "You still drink coffee that tastes financially successful?" Robert looked offended. "I drink normal coffee." Sophia stared at him. "You once described espresso using the word textured." Robert sighed heavily. "That was one time." Sophia smiled into her coffee cup while the waitress walked away. The conversation settled afterward. Not uncomfortable, careful, like both of them kept touching emotional edges without fully stepping across them. Robert finally cleared his throat softly. "So, the foundation wants to expand community programs in Brooklyn and Harlem." Sophia nodded professionally. "I reviewed the proposal, and I think it could actually help people." Robert raised an eyebrow. That sounded surprising. Sophia leaned back slightly. "You'd be amazed how many wealthy people use charity events for photography with children." Robert laughed once, under his breath. "That cynical now? That experienced now? Fair." They spent the next 30 minutes discussing outreach ideas, staffing logistics, food programs, and event planning. And slowly, something dangerous started happening. The old rhythm between them returned naturally. Not romance, not safety, familiarity. Robert noticed Sophia still tapped her fingers lightly whenever concentrating. Sophia noticed Robert still rubbed his thumb against coffee cups while thinking. Tiny things. The kind people only remember after loving somebody deeply. At one point, Sophia reached across the table absent-mindedly to wipe powdered sugar from the side of Robert's sleeve. The second her fingers touched him, both of them froze slightly. Sophia pulled back immediately. "Sorry." Robert looked down at the sleeve, then back at her. "It's okay." But the tension afterward felt entirely different. Not awkward. Worse, because it reminded them both their chemistry never actually disappeared. Sophia shifted in her seat carefully before changing subjects. "So, you still avoid subway stations?" Robert looked genuinely offended. "I do not avoid them. You looked emotionally betrayed the last time we rode one." "That train smelled illegal." Sophia burst out laughing. "God!" Robert missed that sound, missed causing it. The realization hit him so suddenly he stopped speaking entirely for a second. Sophia noticed immediately. Her smile faded slightly afterward, because she felt it too. That dangerous pull backward, toward who they used to be together. By the end of the meeting, they somehow stayed nearly 2 hours longer than planned, mostly talking, sometimes arguing lightly, occasionally laughing. And for the first time in years, Robert walked out of a conversation feeling emotionally awake again. That realization terrified him. Over the next few months, business meetings slowly turned into regular contact. At first, everything remained professional. Charity planning, fundraising discussions, outreach coordination, catering logistics, but emotional familiarity kept slipping through anyway. One afternoon, Sophia invited Robert to sample desserts for an upcoming event at her bakery kitchen. The second he walked inside, warm cinnamon and vanilla hit him hard enough emotionally he nearly stopped moving, because the room felt alive. Music playing softly, employees laughing near the counters, ovens running constantly, people moving with energy. Sophia stood near the prep table, wearing an apron with flour on one sleeve. Robert stared briefly. Sophia caught him immediately. Don't start. What? That look. What look? The one where you act surprised I exist outside formal dresses. Robert smiled faintly. You look happy here. Sophia paused for half a second before answering. I am. That honesty carried no performance, and somehow that made Robert even quieter afterward. Sophia handed him a dessert plate. Try this. Robert took one bite carefully, then looked at her. Sophia folded her arms proudly. Exactly. This is ridiculous. I know. Robert pointed toward the plate. How do people emotionally recover from tasting this? They don't. One employee nearby laughed loudly. Sophia leaned toward Robert slightly. I have created dessert dependency. Robert laughed again. And honestly, it felt too easy around her still. That became the dangerous part. No matter how much time passed, being near Sophia still softened something inside him automatically. One evening, after a successful fundraiser event, Robert offered Sophia a ride home because rain hammered Manhattan hard enough to flood sidewalks. Sophia hesitated briefly before agreeing. Inside the car, old R&B played quietly through the speakers. Sophia looked toward him immediately. You still listen to this playlist? Robert kept his eyes on the road. I forgot it was there. You're lying. A little. Sophia smiled softly toward the rain-covered window. Silence settled afterward. But unlike years earlier, this silence carried history now. Complicated history. Eventually, Sophia spoke quietly. You know what's weird? What? I thought seeing you again would make me angry immediately. Robert tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel. And Sophia shrugged lightly. Mostly, it just made me tired emotionally. That honesty hurt him, because she wasn't trying to punish him. She was telling the truth. Robert glanced toward her briefly. I deserved worse than tired. Sophia looked at him carefully after that, then out the window again. You already punished yourself. The sentence stayed inside the car quietly afterward. Rain moved heavily against the windows, while Manhattan lights blurred around them. Robert realized something painful in that moment. Sophia knew him deeply enough to recognize his regret without him saying it directly. And despite everything, part of her still cared. A few weeks later, after another community event in Harlem, Robert and Sophia ended up walking several blocks together because traffic became impossible. The neighborhood buzzed with music and late-night food vendors, while people crowded sidewalks laughing loudly. Sophia pointed toward a small food stand suddenly. You still think chopped cheese is spiritually important? Robert looked at her. I never said spiritually. You implied it emotionally. Sophia ordered for both of them before Robert could protest. A few minutes later, they stood beside the sidewalk eating, while music drifted from a nearby apartment building. Sophia watched Robert take a careful bite. You still eat expensive. That's not a real criticism. It absolutely is. Robert shook his head laughing, then stopped when he realized how naturally they slipped back into old rhythms again. Sophia noticed the shift too. Their eye contact lingered slightly longer afterward. Neither moved away immediately. The city noise around them suddenly felt distant. Sophia swallowed slowly before looking down first. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Later that night, Robert walked Sophia to her apartment building. Rainwater still reflected softly across Harlem sidewalks, while distant music floated through open windows. Neither of them seemed eager for the conversation to end. Sophia stood near the entrance, holding her keys loosely. Tonight was nice. Robert looked at her carefully. Yeah? Another pause. Not awkward, heavy with restraint. Sophia looked exhausted suddenly. Not physically, emotionally. Like resisting him required actual energy now. Robert stepped slightly closer, without fully realizing it. Sophia noticed immediately, but didn't step backward. Their breathing slowed. The distance between them disappeared inch by inch. Robert looked toward her mouth briefly before meeting her eyes again. Sophia's fingers tightened around her keys. God, the chemistry still existed completely. 5 years later, and it still existed. Robert lifted one hand carefully toward her face, and Sophia stepped back first. Not dramatically, quietly, like somebody protecting a healing wound instinctively. Robert froze instantly. Sophia looked down briefly before forcing a soft smile. "Good night, Robert." Then she disappeared inside the building before he could answer. Robert stood alone on the sidewalk afterward, staring at the closed door. And for the first time since reconnecting with Sophia, he understood something terrifying. Loving her again would be easy. Convincing her to trust him again? That might be impossible. For a little while, Robert allowed himself to believe things were getting better. Not fixed, but better. Sophia laughed around him again sometimes. She answered his calls more easily. The tension between them no longer felt sharp every second. Careful progress, that alone meant everything to him, which was exactly why fear returned so quickly. One Thursday morning, Robert walked into his office while adjusting his cufflinks and immediately noticed unusual tension inside the executive floor. Conversations stopped too fast. Assistants avoided eye contact. Phones buzzed constantly. Robert already hated the feeling. His assistant approached carefully. "You should probably see this." Robert took the tablet she handed him and felt his stomach drop instantly. A gossip site had reposted old photos from the rooftop humiliation 5 years earlier. Sophia standing beside him, smiling nervously. Champagne glasses, the rooftop skyline, then blurry photos of her leaving, visibly emotional afterward. The headline read, "CEO Robert Hayes reconnects with woman he publicly rejected years ago." Robert's jaw tightened immediately. Below the article, comments flooded aggressively. She forgave him after that? Money always wins. Humiliating. Hope she remembers what he said. Love alone isn't enough, right? Robert stopped reading. Too late. The damage was already done. Across Manhattan, Sophia stared silently at the exact same article inside her bakery office, while one employee awkwardly pretended not to notice her expression changing. Sophia kept scrolling slowly. Every photo felt like reopening a wound she worked years to survive. The rooftop, the embarrassment, the silence. Her chest tightened painfully. Not because strangers were talking, because public humiliation never fully leaves people emotionally. Sometimes it just waits quietly until something reminds you again. Sophia locked her phone immediately and stood up too fast from the chair. "You okay?" an employee asked softly. Sophia nodded automatically. "Yeah. Just need air." Lie. She wasn't okay at all. Outside the bakery, cold wind hit her face, while traffic moved loudly through Harlem streets. Sophia folded her arms tightly against herself, and suddenly, she felt exactly like the woman from 5 years ago again. Vulnerable, exposed, emotionally unsafe. That terrified her more than anything. Meanwhile, inside Robert's office, executives already started circling the situation carefully. One investor called before noon. Another requested an emergency meeting. By afternoon, Robert sat inside a glass conference room listening to concerns he already knew were coming. An executive spoke carefully. The media attention could complicate current negotiations. Robert looked exhausted already. "It's a gossip article. It's perception." That word again. Perception. Robert actually laughed once under his breath. Not amused laughter. Something colder. One investor leaned forward seriously. "You cannot afford emotional instability attached to your public image again." Again. Robert stared at him quietly. Because 5 years earlier, those exact kinds of conversations helped destroy the best relationship of his life. And somehow these people still believed they were protecting him. Robert stood slowly from his chair. The room became cautious immediately. "I'm done having conversations about Sophia like she's a business liability." Nobody answered immediately. One executive adjusted his tie awkwardly. Another cleared his throat softly. But Robert noticed something important. Nobody apologized either. That silence felt familiar. Too familiar. Hours later, Robert arrived outside Sophia's bakery unannounced, just before closing time. The second he stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. Sophia moved differently tonight. Shorter answers, less eye contact. Too emotionally controlled. Which usually meant she was upset enough to hide it carefully. One employee quietly disappeared into the back room, sensing tension immediately. Robert approached slowly. "You saw the article?" Sophia kept wiping down the counter without looking at him. "Hard to avoid. I'm handling it." That made her laugh softly. Not happy laughter. "You said that before, too." The sentence hit immediately. Robert exhaled carefully. "Sophia?" She finally looked at him then, and the pain in her eyes unsettled him instantly. Not anger. Fear. That was worse. Sophia placed the towel down slowly. "You know what's crazy?" Robert stayed quiet. "I worked so hard not to become that woman again." "What woman?" "The woman everybody pitied." Her voice stayed calm. That somehow made the conversation hurt more. Sophia folded her arms lightly. "For years, I rebuilt my confidence piece by piece. And now one article brings all of it back overnight." Robert stepped closer, carefully. "You are not that woman anymore." Sophia smiled sadly. "I know that logically." Then she looked away briefly, before continuing quieter. "But embarrassment doesn't disappear logically." Robert had no immediate response, because deep down, he understood exactly what she meant. Sophia finally sat on one of the empty chairs near the window, looking emotionally drained. Outside, Harlem moved normally while her entire nervous system felt trapped in the past again. Robert sat across from her carefully. "I never wanted this to happen again." Sophia looked at him directly. But it did. Another painful silence settled between them. Not empty. Fragile. Sophia rubbed both hands together slowly. "You know what scared me most seeing those pictures again?" Robert waited quietly. "You?" That surprised him. Sophia swallowed carefully. "You looked exactly the same." Robert frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means I couldn't tell if you'd protect me differently this time." That sentence sat heavily between them. Because, despite all the chemistry returning, despite all the reconnecting, Sophia still didn't fully trust him emotionally. And honestly, she had every reason not to. Robert leaned forward slightly. "I'm trying to change that." "I know. Then why does it still feel like you're waiting for disaster?" Sophia looked down briefly, then laughed softly to herself. "Because disaster already happened once." Fair. Painfully fair. The bakery stayed quiet around them, while distant music drifted through the neighborhood outside. Sophia finally asked the question sitting inside her since the article appeared. The question she probably feared asking. "If everybody turns against me again?" She paused briefly. Not dramatic. Just enough to steady herself emotionally. Then looked directly into Robert's eyes. "Would you finally stand beside me this time?" Robert opened his mouth immediately, and nothing came out. Not because he didn't want to answer, because fear still existed inside him somewhere. Smaller now, shameful now, but still there. And Sophia saw the hesitation instantly. That destroyed her expression completely. Not loudly, quietly, like somebody watching history repeat itself in real time. Robert finally tried speaking. "Sophia, But she already stood up. That terrified him immediately, because 5 years ago, she walked away after silence too. Sophia grabbed her coat carefully from the chair nearby. "No," she said softly. "Don't force an answer." Robert stood quickly. "That's not fair." Sophia looked emotionally exhausted now. "You know what's unfair?" Her voice cracked slightly for the first time all night. "Loving somebody and still feeling unsafe with them." Robert felt that sentence physically. Sophia looked toward the bakery windows briefly before continuing quieter. "I believe you regret hurting me." Robert swallowed hard. But regret and courage aren't always the same thing. God, that hurt because it was true. Sophia stepped toward the door slowly. Robert followed instinctively. "Sophia, please." She stopped near the entrance but didn't turn around immediately. When she finally did, her eyes looked tired more than angry, and somehow that hurt him even worse. "I can survive people judging me now," she said quietly, "but I can't survive trusting you completely. If you still freeze when pressure shows up." Robert had no defense left, because his silence moments earlier already answered everything. Sophia gave him one small broken smile. then left the bakery quietly. The door closed softly behind her. Robert stood completely still afterward and suddenly realized something horrifying. Silence ruined his life twice. After Sophia walked out of the bakery, Robert stayed there alone for almost 20 minutes without moving. The lights above the counter hummed softly. Music still played from the kitchen speaker somewhere in the back. A half-finished dessert tray sat near the register untouched. Everything around him looked warm. And somehow, that made the emptiness feel worse. Because Sophia built this life herself, piece by piece, without him. Robert lowered himself slowly into one of the empty chairs near the window and stared out at Harlem traffic moving past outside. Her question replayed inside his head over and over again. If everybody turns against me again, would you finally stand beside me this time? And the terrible part? He still hesitated, even after losing her once, even after years of regret, even after watching loneliness slowly hollow out his life. Fear still paused him. That realization disgusted him more than any investor criticism ever could. Robert rubbed both hands over his face slowly, then laughed, once quietly to himself, not amused, exhausted, because suddenly he understood something humiliating with brutal clarity. He kept calling himself a powerful man, while letting other people influence the most important decisions of his life. That wasn't strength. That was cowardice, wearing expensive suits. Outside the bakery, rain started falling lightly against Harlem sidewalks. Robert stood slowly and walked toward the door, then stopped halfway. 5 years ago, he watched Sophia walk away, emotionally destroyed, and convinced himself silence was safer than conflict. Tonight, he almost repeated the exact same mistake. No, not again. Robert grabbed his phone immediately, then stopped. Calling her right now wouldn't fix anything. Sophia didn't need another emotional speech whispered privately after public damage already existed. She needed proof. Real proof. That thought followed Robert home through the rain. Inside his penthouse apartment later that night, he stood near the windows overlooking Manhattan, while city lights reflected across the glass. The apartment felt cold again, not physically, emotionally, and for the first time in years, Robert stopped blaming loneliness on circumstance. He created this life himself. The silence, the distance, the emptiness. Fear built all of it. His phone buzzed repeatedly across the kitchen counter. Investors, executives, his mother. Robert ignored every call. Eventually, one message from his mother appeared. "You need to handle this situation carefully." Robert stared at the message for several seconds, then typed back, "No. I already handled it carefully once. That decision ruined my life." He sent the message before second-guessing himself. A minute later, his phone rang immediately. Robert answered. His mother sounded controlled at first. "Robert." "No." The firmness in his voice surprised even him. Silence followed briefly. Then she spoke again. Slower this time. "You're emotional right now." "No," Robert replied quietly. "I'm honest right now." Another silence. Robert walked slowly through the apartment while speaking. "For years I convinced myself protecting my reputation mattered more than protecting the person I loved." His mother exhaled softly. "You're simplifying complicated realities." "No," he answered immediately. "I complicated something simple." That landed heavily between them. Because deep down, even his mother knew he was right now. Robert looked toward the couch where Sophia once fell asleep during movie nights. "I hurt somebody who never once made me feel small." His mother finally softened slightly. "You really still love her?" Robert closed his eyes briefly. "I never stopped." The call ended quietly afterward. Not resolved. Not dramatic. Just honest, in a way their conversations rarely had been. The next morning, executive pressure exploded fully. By 9 a.m., Robert sat inside a corporate conference room facing several furious investors demanding damage control around the gossip articles. One executive spoke sharply, "This situation threatens current negotiations." Another added, "The board is concerned about emotional instability affecting leadership." Robert listened silently at first. 5 years ago, Those conversations intimidated him. Now, mostly they exhausted him. One investor slid printed articles across the table aggressively. Public association with controversy weakens confidence. Robert stared at the papers briefly, then finally asked, "Do any of you actually hear yourselves?" The room went still. The investor frowned. "Excuse me?" Robert leaned back slowly in his chair. "You're discussing a woman, like she's a market problem, instead of a human being." Nobody answered immediately. Another executive attempted calming the situation. "This isn't personal." Robert laughed quietly. "That's exactly the problem." The room shifted uncomfortably, because for the first time, Robert stopped performing emotional detachment for them. One investor leaned forward carefully. "You need to think rationally." Robert looked directly at him. "No. I've been thinking rationally for years." Then his voice lowered slightly. "And I've never been more miserable in my life." Silence. Real silence this time. Not strategic silence. Human silence. Because truth makes rooms uncomfortable when people spend years avoiding it. Robert stood from the table slowly. "You know what Sophia once told me?" Nobody answered. "She said success becomes dangerous when people stop feeling human around you." Robert adjusted his suit jacket calmly. She was right. Then he walked out of the meeting, before anybody could stop him. Outside the building, Manhattan moved loudly around him while cold wind pushed between skyscrapers. For the first time in years, Robert felt terrified and strangely free at the same time, because courage finally costs something, and now he was paying for it. Meanwhile, Sophia tried focusing on work again. She really did, but emotionally, she felt shaken after the bakery conversation. The gossip articles kept spreading. Customers whispered sometimes. Online comments reopened old embarrassment. Most people praised her success now, but public humiliation leaves scars that react quickly under pressure. One afternoon, while preparing desserts for a charity order, Sophia accidentally dropped an entire tray after seeing another article notification appear on her phone. The crash startled everybody inside the kitchen. An employee rushed forward immediately. "You okay?" Sophia nodded too fast. "Yeah. I'm fine." Lie. Again. Later that evening, Sophia stood alone outside the bakery after closing, while exhaustion settled heavily across her shoulders. Harlem music drifted softly through nearby apartment windows. Normally that sound comforted her. Tonight her mind kept replaying Robert's hesitation inside the bakery. That tiny pause before answering her question. Sophia closed her eyes briefly, because she loved him. That was the dangerous part. No matter how much healing she accomplished, part of her still loved him enough to get hurt again. And honestly, that terrified her more than loneliness ever did. Across Manhattan, Robert made a decision. 3 days later, his company prepared for its largest annual charity gala. Massive media attendance, investors, executives, press coverage. The exact kind of event where Robert normally delivered carefully polished corporate speeches about leadership and philanthropy. This year's speech, already weighted, printed neatly inside a folder on his desk. Safe, controlled, emotionally empty. Robert stared at the speech for a long time, then looked toward another document sitting beside it. A handwritten page, messier, honest, dangerous. He picked it up slowly. The words weren't perfect, good. Neither was he. That night, Robert visited Harlem alone for the first time in years without security or assistance following behind him. He walked past the restaurant where Sophia teased him about seasoning the subway entrance, where she once danced publicly to embarrass him, the street corner where they ate chopped cheese laughing in the rain. Memory followed him everywhere. But now the memories felt less like punishment, more like instructions. Because every meaningful moment of his life connected back to one truth. Sophia made him emotionally brave before the world convinced him bravery was weakness. And he betrayed that. Robert stopped outside Sophia's bakery eventually. The lights were off already. He stood there quietly staring through the windows at empty tables and neatly arranged chairs. then noticed something taped near the register inside. A framed quote. Even from outside, Robert recognized the handwriting immediately. Sophia's. The quote read, "People who survive heartbreak learn one important thing. Peace matters more than performance." Robert swallowed hard, because for years, his entire life became performance, and he was finally tired of it. The following evening, the massive charity gala began filling with wealthy guests, cameras, and corporate sponsors beneath enormous ballroom chandeliers. Exactly the kind of environment that once destroyed him emotionally. Backstage, Robert adjusted his tie while assistants rushed around reviewing schedules nervously. One executive handed him the prepared corporate speech folder. "Media attendance is huge tonight," the man warned carefully. Robert looked down at the folder silently, then toward the ballroom entrance where guests continued arriving. He imagined Sophia somewhere out there, possibly attending, possibly avoiding him completely. Either way, he knew one thing now with absolute certainty. If fear spoke louder than love again tonight, he deserved to lose her forever. An assistant approached quietly. "You're on in 5 minutes." Robert looked down once more at the carefully prepared corporate speech in his hands, then calmly closed the folder and walked toward the stage carrying something else entirely. The ballroom looked painfully familiar. That was the first thing Robert noticed as he stepped toward the stage. Same luxury atmosphere, same champagne glasses, same wealthy laughter echoing beneath expensive lighting, same polished smiles hiding private judgment. 5 years ago, a room like this destroyed the most important relationship of his life. Tonight, the same kind of room would finally hear the truth. Robert adjusted the microphone slowly while cameras flashed across the ballroom. Hundreds of guests turned toward the stage. Executives gathered near the front tables. Investors watched carefully beside media crews. And somewhere inside that crowd, Sophia stood quietly near the back of the ballroom, after arriving almost an hour late, debating whether she should attend at all. She wore a deep wine-colored dress, with simple gold earrings, and calm makeup that hid exhaustion better than sleep ever could lately. At first, she planned to stay briefly, smile politely, support the charity initiative, leave early. Then Robert stepped onto the stage, and something about his expression immediately unsettled her. No polished confidence, no corporate performance, no emotionally distant executive mask. He looked nervous, actually nervous. Sophia's stomach tightened slowly. On stage, Robert unfolded the handwritten speech in his hands. The ballroom quieted completely. One executive near the front table smiled with visible relief, expecting another predictable corporate address. Robert glanced down at the prepared speech folder, resting untouched beside the podium, then pushed it away. Several executives exchanged confused looks immediately. Sophia noticed, and suddenly, her heartbeat started climbing. Robert leaned toward the microphone carefully. For years, he began quietly. "I believed success meant controlling perception." The ballroom stayed still. Robert looked across the crowd slowly, and honestly, "I got very good at it." A few polite laughs surfaced weakly. Robert didn't smile. "I learned how to sound confident when I was afraid, how to appear successful while feeling empty, how to protect my reputation even when it cost me things that mattered more." Sophia's chest tightened instantly, because suddenly she realized this speech wasn't about business. The room slowly sensed it too. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Investors stopped smiling. Even the wait staff near the ballroom entrances paused subtly. Robert exhaled slowly before continuing. 5 years ago, I stood in a room almost exactly like this one." Sophia froze completely. "No." Robert looked down briefly. "And I publicly hurt somebody I loved because I cared more about approval than courage." The ballroom became painfully quiet. Some guests recognized the story immediately. Others looked confused. Several executives visibly panicked. Robert kept going anyway, because for the first time in years, fear no longer controlled him. "I told myself complicated lies back then," he admitted softly. That protecting my image mattered. That perception mattered. That powerful people understood life better than love did. His voice roughened slightly. But the truth? Robert looked directly into the crowd. I was just scared. Sophia felt tears threatening instantly, not because the room watched, because Robert finally sounded honest. Actually, honest. No hiding. No careful language. No silence. Robert glanced briefly toward the executives, sitting rigidly near the front tables. Some people spend years building successful lives, while slowly destroying their ability to feel human inside them. That sentence hit the room heavily, because everybody there knew exactly what kind of people he meant, including himself. Robert's fingers tightened slightly around the paper in his hands. And the worst part about fear, he paused briefly. It usually sounds practical, while it ruins your life. Across the ballroom, Sophia lowered her eyes briefly, because 5 years ago, that was exactly what happened. Robert convinced himself he was being practical, while destroying both of them emotionally. On stage, Robert looked toward the back of the ballroom again, and finally saw her, Sophia, standing perfectly still beneath soft chandelier light. The second their eyes met, the rest of the room disappeared emotionally. Robert swallowed carefully, then spoke directly to her, even though everybody else could hear it too. The woman I was ashamed to stand beside became the strongest person I've ever known. The ballroom reacted instantly. Sharp silence, surprised expressions, emotional discomfort spreading table by table. But Robert never looked away from Sophia now, because 5 years earlier, he failed her publicly while staring at silence. Tonight he chose her publicly while staring at truth. Sophia's breathing became uneven immediately. Not because of the attention, because this was the exact thing she never believed Robert would actually do. Stand beside her openly when pressure existed. Robert stepped away from the podium slowly. No polished presentation anymore. No prepared corporate pacing. Just honesty. I watched her rebuild herself after I humiliated her. His voice lowered slightly, and she did it with more grace than I deserved. Sophia closed her eyes briefly. Emotion hit too hard too fast. Memories collided inside her. Rain running through Manhattan streets. Crying inside the taxi, deleting Robert's number, rebuilding her life exhausted and heartbroken. Standing inside kitchens at 2 a.m, trying to survive emotionally. And now the same man who once stayed silent was finally speaking. Robert continued carefully. She taught me something I understood too late. Another pause. Love doesn't fail because people lack money. It fails because fear makes people abandon each other when loyalty matters most. Nobody inside the ballroom moved. Even cameras stopped flashing as frequently now, because suddenly, this no longer felt like an executive speech. It felt human, painfully human. Robert looked down briefly, before admitting the hardest truth of all. I spent years blaming pressure, blaming expectations, blaming complicated circumstances. Then he shook his head slowly. But none of that was the real problem. Sophia stared at him silently. Robert met her eyes again. I was weak. That confession landed harder than dramatic emotion ever could, because powerful men rarely admit weakness publicly, especially in rooms like this. And yet Robert stood there willingly destroying the exact image he spent years protecting. For her, one investor near the front table looked furious already. Good. Robert no longer cared. He stepped fully away from the stage now, and into the ballroom itself, towards Sophia. Guests instinctively moved aside while he walked. The same type of wealthy crowd that once watched Sophia leave humiliated now watched Robert walk toward her openly without hesitation. The emotional mirror between both moments felt overwhelming. 5 years ago, Sophia walked away alone, while Robert stayed frozen. Tonight, Robert crossed the room toward her while everybody watched. No fear this time. Sophia's eyes filled despite herself, not because she suddenly forgot the pain, because this moment represented something she waited years to see. Courage. Real courage. Robert stopped directly in front of her, close enough now that neither of them could hide emotional reactions anymore. Sophia laughed once softly through tears. You really picked the most traumatic possible way to do this. That nearly broke him emotionally. Because even now, even here, she still sounded like herself. Robert smiled shakily. You always said I lacked personality. Sophia wiped beneath one eye quickly. I said your apartment lacked personality. Same difference. A tiny laugh escaped her before emotion caught it halfway. Around them, the ballroom remained completely silent. Nobody wanted to interrupt whatever this moment had become. Robert looked at Sophia carefully. No podium now. No microphone between them. No performance left. Just truth. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Sophia looked down briefly. Not because the apology surprised her, because she believed him. That was dangerous. Robert continued carefully. I know apologizing doesn't erase anything. No, Sophia whispered softly. It doesn't. Robert nodded once. I know I can't undo what I did. Another nod from Sophia. Tears still shimmered in her eyes now, despite how hard she tried controlling them. Robert exhaled slowly. But I needed you to know something publicly this time. The ballroom felt emotionally suspended around them. Robert's voice lowered slightly. I never stopped loving you. Sophia's lips parted slightly. Pain moved visibly across her expression, because hearing that after all these years hurt and healed at the same time. Robert looked terrified suddenly, not of the crowd, of losing her again. I don't expect forgiveness tonight, he admitted. I don't expect trust immediately. And honestly, I probably don't deserve either one yet. Sophia's chest tightened harder, because this was the first time Robert stopped trying to manage emotional outcomes. He was finally just being honest. Robert swallowed carefully. But I'm done choosing fear over you. That sentence shattered something inside her emotionally. Because 5 years ago, that was all she ever wanted. Robert's eyes softened fully now, and for the first time since she met him years earlier, Sophia saw no hesitation anywhere inside him. None. Then Robert said the one thing that finally broke her composure completely. I don't want another 5 years without you. Sophia covered her mouth instantly as tears slipped down her face. Not graceful tears. Not cinematic tears. Real ones. The kind people cry when emotional walls finally crack after years of protecting themselves. Around them, the ballroom remained completely silent. No applause yet. No movement. Just people witnessing something painfully genuine. Sophia looked at Robert through tears, while trying unsuccessfully to steady her breathing. Because after everything, after the humiliation, after the rebuilding, after the fear, the man standing in front of her finally chose love, louder than pride. The ballroom stayed quiet for several long seconds after Robert finished speaking. Nobody rushed the moment. Nobody interrupted. Even the executives, who looked deeply uncomfortable, understood something important now. This was no longer a corporate event. This was two people standing in the middle of years of unfinished pain. Sophia wiped beneath her eyes carefully while trying to breathe normally again. Robert stood directly in front of her, looking more emotionally exposed than she had ever seen him. Not polished, not controlled, not protected by status, just vulnerable. And honestly, that frightened her almost as much as it moved her. Because for years, Sophia convinced herself she no longer needed anything emotionally from Robert. That belief kept her safe. Now he stood in front of her publicly dismantling the exact fear that once destroyed them. And suddenly, she didn't know what to do with all the feelings returning at once. Robert spoke again quietly. You don't have to answer me tonight. Sophia laughed softly through tears. That might be the smartest thing you've said in years. A few relieved laughs moved gently through the ballroom. The tension loosened slightly. Robert smiled faintly too. God, he missed making her laugh. Sophia looked around the room slowly afterward. Same kind of wealthy atmosphere. Same social world. Same pressure. But tonight felt completely different. 5 years ago, she stood inside a room like this, feeling emotionally abandoned. Tonight, Robert stood beside her openly while every important person in his world watched. No hesitation. That difference mattered more than any speech. Sophia looked back at him carefully. You embarrassed a lot of rich people tonight. Robert glanced around briefly. Honestly, they'll survive. That pulled another laugh out of her, despite herself. And hearing it again, after everything, felt almost unreal. Eventually, the ballroom slowly resumed movement around them. Conversations returned quietly. Music started again. People exhaled emotionally, like they'd been holding their breath for 10 minutes. But Robert and Sophia remained standing near each other, still caught inside the weight of everything unsaid between them. Sophia folded her arms lightly. You really meant all of that? Robert answered immediately. Yes. No pause. No fear. That alone shook her emotionally. Sophia looked down briefly. You know what's annoying? What? I spent years trying to stop loving you. Robert's chest tightened instantly. Sophia laughed softly to herself, and apparently, my emotional discipline is terrible. Robert smiled despite the emotion pressing against his ribs. It's not terrible. It absolutely is. Another small silence settled between them. Softer this time. Not fragile anymore, just honest. Sophia finally looked at him directly again. You hurt me badly, Robert. The sentence stayed simple. That made it heavier. Robert nodded slowly. I know. No, Sophia corrected gently. I don't think you fully do. That honesty mattered, because forgiveness without truth becomes fake quickly. Sophia exhaled carefully before continuing. For a long time I questioned everything about myself after that night. Robert looked devastated immediately. Sophia shook her head lightly. I know now the problem was never my worth. She paused briefly. But healing from humiliation takes time. Robert stepped slightly closer. I would take all of that pain back if I could. Sophia smiled sadly. I know you would. And she did know now. That was the dangerous part. For years, Robert regretted losing her privately. Tonight, he proved it publicly. Sophia studied his face carefully. No performance left. No corporate mask. No emotional distance. Just the man she fell in love with years ago. Finally brave enough to protect that love openly. Her eyes softened, despite herself. That speech was reckless. Robert nodded once. Probably. You upset your investors. Definitely. You may have started several executive panic attacks. Robert laughed quietly. Worth it. Sophia looked away quickly, hiding another emotional smile. Because, honestly, part of her missed this. The easy rhythm between them. The humor underneath tension. The feeling that conversations with Robert never fully ended emotionally. But another part of her still felt scared. That mattered too. Sophia became quiet for a moment before speaking carefully. I can't go backward. Robert's expression softened immediately. I'm not asking you to. I mean it. Sophia looked directly into his eyes. I'm not the same woman who cried in that taxi 5 years ago. Robert nodded slowly. I know, and if we ever try this again. Her voice lowered slightly. I need emotional safety, not promises, not speeches. Safety. Robert answered without hesitation this time. You have it. The certainty in his voice affected her immediately. No pause again. No silence. Sophia noticed, and so did he. That realization hung gently between them. A waiter passed nearby, carrying champagne. Neither of them touched a glass. They'd already consumed enough emotion for one night. Eventually, Sophia looked toward the ballroom exit. I need air. Robert nodded carefully. Okay. Then, hesitated briefly. Do you want company? Sophia studied him for a second, then answered softly. Yes. Outside, cool Manhattan air moved through the city, while traffic glowed beneath the night skyline. The sounds felt distant compared to the ballroom noise behind them. Sophia leaned lightly against the balcony railing while Robert stood beside her quietly. For a while, neither spoke. Not because things felt awkward, because after years of unfinished emotion, words suddenly felt smaller than everything sitting between them. Finally, Sophia laughed softly to herself. What? She looked at him sideways. You know the crazy part? What? You still look emotionally confused on rooftops. Robert smiled. Some things never change. Sophia looked toward the skyline again. That used to scare me. What did? How much peace I felt around you. Robert stayed quiet. Sophia shook her head lightly. I didn't realize people could become emotionally addictive. That sentence landed deeply, because Robert understood exactly what she meant. Even after years apart, being beside her still made the world feel quieter somehow. Sophia turned toward him fully now. I'm still angry sometimes. You should be. I still remember everything. So do I. And part of me still wants to protect myself from you. Robert swallowed carefully. I know. Sophia watched him closely after that, waiting, testing emotionally whether hesitation would appear again. It didn't. That mattered more than he realized. Sophia stepped closer slowly. Not dramatic. Careful, like somebody touching healing skin gently for the first time. Robert looked at her like he still couldn't fully believe she remained standing beside him after everything. Sophia smiled faintly. You know rebuilding trust is going to take time, right? Robert nodded immediately. I'll take whatever time you give me. No hesitation again. Sophia noticed every single time now. And little by little, the fear inside her loosened. Not disappeared. Loosened. That was more realistic. Later that night, long after the gala ended, Robert and Sophia walked quietly through Harlem together beneath glowing streetlights, while music drifted from apartment windows nearby. No cameras, no executives, no wealthy audiences, just them. Exactly where their relationship always felt most honest. Sophia held a paper tray of street food, while Robert complained dramatically about hot sauce levels. You're trying to kill me. Sophia laughed loudly. You've been eating mild food your entire life. Your taste buds need emotional growth. That sentence doesn't even make sense. It does spiritually. Robert shook his head, smiling. God, he missed this so much. They kept walking slowly through the neighborhood while distant laughter echoed from nearby sidewalks. At one point, Sophia reached for his hand instinctively, then paused slightly. Robert noticed immediately, but didn't pressure her. A second later, she took his hand anyway. Warm, familiar, real. Neither spoke for several steps afterward. They didn't need to, because sometimes healing starts quietly. Not with perfection, not with forgetting, with two people finally choosing honesty over pride. The narrator speaks softly. Sometimes love returns after pride finally leaves the room. Sophia looked up at Robert while music floated softly through the Harlem night, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt emotionally alone anymore. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, do you believe love deserves a second chance after betrayal?